The guy used to be a complete deadbeat, just wasting his life away. But no one expected that a near-death experience would trigger his awakening, an ability to manipulate sand. At first, the ability was written off as a trash-tier F-rank power. But the world had badly underestimated what sand could really do. Hands down, this was the most overpowered ability on the planet. No contest. When enemies closed in from every side, a wide-range sand attack could wipe them out in a single devastating strike. In just 3 short years, he rose from an F-rank awakened to become the absolute king of this wasteland. And the reason he became so terrifyingly strong had everything to do with this world of endless sand. More than a century ago, a mysterious beam of light struck Earth. The blue planet that once nurtured all life was instantly reduced to a massive desert graveyard. The few surviving humans could only cower in fortresses scattered across the wasteland, fighting just to breathe. Zane sneered inwardly. If the world was destined for destruction anyway, why not wipe the slate clean? Why leave these pathetic roaches scurrying around? The moment that thought crossed his mind, a heavy fist slammed into him, pinning him violently against a car door. The thug just grinned, claiming his hand had slipped. But before he offered a fake apology, he wanted to know Zane's name. Zane looked up with dead eyes. "Name's Zane. What's your problem?" The thug burst out laughing. "Only one name? Don't you see all your daddies standing right in front of you?" That single line instantly set Zane's temper ablaze. The guy then casually sat down beside him, mocking that since they were both outcasts, they should play nice. He even started guessing Zane's background, assuming he was either a criminal or a fugitive running from an assault, fraud, or theft charge. The next second, Zane smashed his fist straight into the guy's face. The impact sent the man's body flying backward. Zane stepped forward and said coldly, "Since you're so damn curious about my crimes, I'll tell you. Murder. Though strictly speaking, it doesn't count. In this shithole of a world, only the strong have the right to be called human." Back then, Zane thought he had only offed some random nobody. He never expected that nobody to have serious backing. His older brother turned out to be Lee Ji-rin. That realization had chilled Zane to the bone. Because Lee Ji-rin's brother was a true powerhouse, one of the elites this world recognized as human. And the Awakened? They were gods towering above humanity. Word on the street was that Lee Ji-rin had been hunting for Zane everywhere. And against all odds, the bastard had actually tracked him down. Suddenly, hot blood sprayed across Zane's vision. For a split second, his brain short-circuited. He had clearly landed the punch, so why was his own fist bleeding? Before Zane could even register the pain, a massive hand clamped firmly over his face. With a slight twist of the wrist, the man flipped Zane's entire body mid-air. The brutal impact rattled Zane's organs, leaving him gasping for air on the ground. The guy standing over him was obviously no ordinary street trash. Zane had dragged himself through hell just to escape the Awakened's radar. Yet, in the end, an Awakened had still caught up to him. Out of nowhere, the entire bus violently lurched. Then the massive vehicle began rolling out of control, tumbling over the dunes. The bald thug, completely clueless, started screaming at the driver for screwing up, but the driver was already paralyzed, his face drained of all color. The bus wasn't just rolling, it was being swallowed whole by a massive sandworm. Absolute panic erupted inside the cabin as everyone scrambled desperately for an exit. But they were out of time. Endless waves of sand surged in, wrapping tightly around their bodies like a death shroud. Out here in New Seoul, getting devoured by a sandworm right after crossing paths with an Awakened was just a typical Tuesday. That was simply the brutal logic of this world. The strong stripped everything from the weak. Even if Zane died here, he'd just be logged as another pathetic casualty. No one would bat an eye at their decks. If he had just pushed himself to be a little stronger, he wouldn't be dying like a dog. But regrets were useless now, because Zane's consciousness was already fading into the dark. Suddenly, his eyes snapped wide open. He wasn't buried under the crushing weight of the desert. Instead, the sand itself was pulling him back to the surface. More than that, Zane felt a terrifying, explosive shift happening deep inside his body. A second ago, his lungs were screaming for oxygen. Now, somehow, the entire environment outside was feeding directly into his senses. At first, Zane thought his dying brain was hallucinating. But when he focused, the rusted tower outside and the broken skyline in the distance mapped themselves perfectly inside his mind. Zane's heartbeat accelerated, a feral light igniting in his eyes. With every breath he took, the pulse of the outside world synced with his own. Zane had absolutely no idea what kind of freakish mutation this was. For a fleeting second, his awareness expanded so far he felt he could touch the stars beyond the atmosphere. In that singular moment, he became the Earth. He was the living embodiment of the dead planet. All signs pointed to one conclusion. Zane had awakened. He slowly raised his hands, and as he willed it, countless grains of sand swarmed around his fingertips. Boom! A concentrated shockwave blasted out, blowing a clean hole straight through the monster's flesh. Only one primal thought echoed in his skull. In a reality swallowed by sand, he was going to claw his way out alive. Even with a towering monstrosity blocking his path, backing down wasn't an option. Zane flexed his fingers, feeling the raw thrumming energy flooding his veins. His cells were practically screaming. There was no denying it anymore. He was officially an awakened. The wounded sandworm thrashed violently, tearing up the dunes in agony. Standing before the colossal beast, Zane looked no bigger than a speck of dust. The monster unhinged its massive jaws, diving down to swallow him in one bite. Zane slammed his palm into the earth, ready to detonate. But right before he could trigger his attack, a heavy hand shoved his head down. A cold voice told him to stop playing hero and get the hell out of the way. Before Zane could react, an overwhelming kinetic force slammed into him, launching him backward like a ragdoll. He crashed hard into a sandbank, rolling several times before stopping. That absolute lunatic had swatted him away like a fly, and Zane hadn't even sensed him approaching. Coughing up dust, Zane looked up, his eyes widening in pure shock. Fountains of black blood were erupting from the sandworm's armored hide. The man who had pushed him had single-handedly brought the nightmare creature to its knees. With a devastating kick, the shockwave cratered the ground, burying the monster beneath the displaced earth. For a moment, Zane wasn't sure if the world had finally lost its mind, or if he had. The man had casually slaughtered a sandworm without breaking a sweat. Zane had never witnessed an awakened with that kind of sickening power. Out of nowhere, a blue-haired woman materialized beside him. She casually dropped a name, Chan Yongbum. Zane instinctively stepped back, eyeing her with deep suspicion. Who the hell was she? What really pissed him off was how these freaks kept bypassing his newly heightened senses, and the second she gripped his arm, Zane felt an unnatural, crushing pressure, followed by a freezing numbness creeping up his skin. He barked at her to let go, but her grip was like a vice. Jang Yongbum shot them a sharp glare, and said coldly, "You're a real pain in the ass, you know that? I told you to just attack directly. Smash the brain near the mouth, and these freaks drop in one hit." The blue-haired woman sighed, saying she wasn't built for that kind of brute force. Besides, this guy was the only survivor left breathing. Before Zane could process that, she launched a swift kick into his gut, sending him skidding across the dirt. She immediately followed up with a brutal grappling hold, pinning him to the ground. Zane gritted his teeth, completely baffled by their psychotic behavior. The blue-haired woman chuckled softly. "Now then, let's see what class and rank our lucky survivor here is packing." But her playful tone vanished the moment she checked his arm. The guy writhing under her wasn't an awakened. She couldn't find a single rank mark etched into his skin. Zane silently cursed her for being blind. He was literally overflowing with power. How could he not have a mark? The roar of an engine interrupted them. A heavily modified rover pulled up, and the driver yelled, "What the hell is the holdup? The sun's about to set." The woman looked back, asking what they should do with the stray. If they left him stranded out here, he was dead meat. John Yongbum stared down at Zane, calculating. Zane locked eyes with him, refusing to look away. "Throw him in the back," John Yongbum ordered. He was heading toward the mining zone anyway. And so, under the bleeding sunset, the rover tore across the desolate wasteland. The bespectacled guy driving kept raging. "Why do you guys always have to pull this lone wolf crap? I told you it was getting dark." Ignoring the shouting match up front, Zane sat bound tight in the back seat. Focusing his will, he covertly manipulated a handful of sand into a tight, spinning vortex right in front of his eyes. The moment he dropped his concentration, the sand scattered harmlessly onto the floorboards. It wasn't a fluke. The sand answered to his thoughts. He was definitely an awakened, but why the hell couldn't that woman see his rank mark? He twisted his arm to look closer and realized something was definitely off. It wasn't the glowing orange he expected. Instead, the mark was the exact muddy color of the sand itself. The color of a rank mark was strictly dictated by an awakened's combat class. Magic types glowed blue, combat types burned red, though rare mutant classes occasionally popped up in the databases. But manipulating sand? Zane had never even heard rumors of a power like that existing. Even though the faint glow barely registered as a pathetic F rank, Zane knew the truth. This ability had potential as infinite as the wasteland outside the window. A dark smirk crept onto his face. Zane swore to himself. Just wait. Until this power was entirely his, he would lay low, play the victim, and survive no matter what. The day would come when this broken world would serve as his personal stage. Awakening sand manipulation in a world buried under endless deserts, he was practically handpicked by fate. The rover soon breached the perimeter of the magic crystal mine. At a glance, the facility looked deceptively normal. The guards immediately shoved him toward the holding pens to assemble with the new meat. The captain and the blue-haired woman kept tracking him with their eyes. They definitely suspected he was hiding something. A civilian surviving a point-blank sandworm attack with 0 casualties? The math didn't add up. Jang Yongbom wasn't an idiot. He knew luck had nothing to do with it. While dissecting the monster, he had noticed a glaring anomaly. Something had blown a perfectly clean hole straight through the beast's armored abdomen before he even arrived. Jang Yongbom clicked his tongue, regretting that he hadn't forced Zane's name out of him. His gut told him their paths would cross again. Night swallowed the desert. Zane had assumed the mine was just a network of death traps, but there was actually a sprawling, filthy shantytown built for the laborers. Only when they reached the inner camp did the guard finally slice his bindings off. The guard immediately turned away. Zane rubbed his raw wrists and sneered, "You're really just gonna let me walk?" The guard didn't even look back. "Not my circus, not my monkeys. Do whatever the hell you want. Even if you burn this slum to the ground, it ain't my problem." Fine by him, Zane had no intention of picking a fight with a low-level grunt. He needed to scope the place out and scavenge some calories. Navigating the maze of rusted shacks, he soon stumbled upon a grimy food stall. Zane was just about to demand the price of the questionable meat hanging from the hooks, when a faded propaganda poster caught his eye. "Let our sweat ignite the glorious future of New Seoul." The stall owner let out a raspy laugh. "Look at you. Another rookie staring at that load of bullshit." The old man spat on the ground. Whoever wrote that garbage was a sick comedian. New Seoul wasn't running on magic crystals. Zane narrowed his eyes. "What are you getting at? If it's not the crystals, what's powering the city?" The old man pointed a greasy finger dead at Zane's chest. "You are, you little rats. They crack the whip, and you dig. When one batch dies, another fresh batch crawls in. Expendable batteries that don't ask questions. That's the real energy source." Zane shot back with a cold smirk. "You sure talk a big game. I'm guessing your old crew is already fertilizing the dirt down below?" The old man's eyes gleamed with twisted amusement. "So, how did the sandworm's stomach acid feel? Like a warm bath back in mommy's womb?" Zane realized his near-death experience was already camp gossip. The geezer openly mocked him. One minute he was almost monster shit, and the next, he's strutting around this death camp like it's a luxury resort. The old man gestured behind him. If Zane thought surviving here was going to be easy, he was dead wrong. Zane glanced over, but all he saw was a massive mound of scavenged junk. He scoffed. "Are you going senile? It's a pile of garbage. What the hell am I supposed to be looking at?" The old man's smile vanished. "I pulled every single piece of that garbage off a dead man. It's a monument to everyone who thought they could beat the system. And it's exactly what you'll become. Every fresh piece of meat that walked through the gates tried to resist going down into the pits. Everyone knew what a magic crystal mine really was. It was a one-way trip to the grave, so they sold their boots, their coats, anything they had to buy one more day of life up top, until they ultimately had to sell their own bodies. It was a pathetic, useless delay. Their scavenged gear just drained away, bit by bit. In the end, they all met the same miserable fate in the dark, crying that they should have just let the sandworms take them. Legends leave legacies, but when trash dies, all it leaves behind is more trash. The old man leaned in, his eyes full of greed, saying he couldn't wait to see what valuable scraps Zane would leave for his pile. Zane had heard enough of the doomsday speech. "Cut the crap. How much for the meat?" The old man didn't blink. 10 sol. Zane genuinely thought the old bastard was hallucinating. Was the rotting meat stuffed with diamonds? The old man just smirked, saying food down here was worth far more than gold. Zane wasn't about to get extorted over roadkill. He lowered his voice to a dangerous whisper. "You see a new face and think you can bleed me dry? Open your eyes, old man. Do I look like a walking ATM to you?" As Zane spoke, the shadows around the stall shifted. Dozens of vendors and miners silently drew rusted machetes and shivs from their coats. Ignorant of the ambush forming behind him, Zane stood his ground. "I'm not paying that extortion rate. Do your worst." Instantly, the mob surged forward, closing the net. Zane's instincts flared. The lethal intent spiking in the air finally warned him that this was a trap. The old man let out a sinister cackle. You naive little shit. Did you really think a fragile bag of bones like me could run a shop in a slaughterhouse without backup? Zane whipped his head around, finding himself completely boxed in by dead-eyed thugs gripping blood-stained blades. The old man leaned back, victorious. All right, tough guy, let's see you talk your way out of this. Slam. Zane hammered his fist onto the wooden counter. His murderous aura vanished instantly, replaced by a panicked, placating tone. Sir, let's all just take a deep breath. There's no way I'm carrying that kind of cash. Let's be reasonable here. The old man knew Zane was broke. Feigning mercy, he waved his hand, saying he wasn't a monster and would gladly accept alternative payments. For instance, that high-grade magic crystal Zane had been awkwardly guarding in his pocket all day would do nicely. Zane cursed inwardly. The old bastard had been tracking his stash the entire time. The old man beckoned with his fingers, promising to give Zane a fair market price if he handed the crystal over without bleeding first. Zane dropped the act. Are you out of your damn mind? Do you know how much blood I had to spill to keep this thing? He desperately tried to stall. Come on, old man, there has to be some flexibility here. What happened to store credit? But before he finished, a massive hand clamped down on his skull from behind. With a sickening thud, the brute smashed Zane's face straight into the wooden planks. The enforcer barked impatiently. Boss, stop entertaining this punk's bullshit. Let's just gut him and take it. But the very next second, the brute's hand was cleanly severed at the wrist. Zane had unleashed his sandblast jet point blank. The thugs caught the severed limb, their faces twisting in pure, unadulterated terror. The scheming old man sitting across the counter was instantly sliced perfectly in half. A brutal, localized sandstorm erupted like a meat grinder, slaughtering every single thug in the stall within seconds. They were the ones asking for a death wish, so they had themselves to blame for the bloodbath. But unfortunately, that hyper-violent massacre was only playing out in Zane's head. In reality, the brute holding Zane down sneered, "What the hell is wrong with this kid? He's been staring into space for a solid minute. Is he having a stroke?" Bitterly aware of the sheer numbers stacked against him, Zane unclenched his fist and tossed the magic crystal onto the table. He glared at the old man with pure venom. "There's your damn crystal. Take it." The old man greedily snatched the gem, holding it up to the flickering light to check its purity. Without blinking, he tossed Zane a measly 100 soul. Everyone in the room knew a rock that size would fetch at least 300 on the black market. But Zane had to swallow the loss. In the slums, the guys with the machetes made the exchange rates. Defeated, Zane let his forehead rest heavily against the table. If he went all out, he could easily snap the old man's neck. But playing his trump card now would paint a massive target on his back. Choking down his pride, Zane gritted his teeth. "Since you're robbing me blind, you're at least throwing in something extra to cover the difference." Having secured his prize, the old man morphed back into a friendly merchant. He waved toward the massive junk pile, telling Zane he could pick exactly one item as a bonus. One item, no questions asked. Whatever he managed to dig out. Zane sifted through the foul-smelling wreckage for what felt like hours, only to realize the pile was literally just useless debris. There wasn't a single weapon or tool worth taking. Watching Zane stubbornly dig through the trash, the old man rubbed his chin in amusement. That psychotic refusal to take a loss, combined with an ugly cockroach-like desperation to survive. It had been a long time since the old man had seen someone with that kind of fire in the mines. Just then, Zane spotted something hidden in the wreckage. The old man spoke from behind him. "That's just scrap dumped by some dead caravan." Zane dug it out, realizing it was probably the only thing of value in the entire pile. Though at the end of the day, it was still trash. The old man chuckled. "You seem pretty attached to that useless piece of junk." Only then did Zane ask what he should call him. The old man squinted, saying his name was Clexy. Zane scoffed coldly. "Clexy, you old bastard, let's hope we never cross paths again." Clexy seemed to be in an exceptionally good mood, joking with a sinister grin that they might meet again sooner than he thought. After leaving the black market, Zane started examining the battered hourglass in his hand. It had about 10 minutes left before the sand ran out, and it became completely dead. Right now, Zane was sitting in the damp, claustrophobic miner's dorm. He took a deep breath, slowly drawing out the dormant power churning inside his veins. The next second, Zane opened his palm, trying to force the object to react to his will. But after wrestling with it for a while, the hourglass remained as dead as a rock. Zane frowned, having no idea if this thing was actually connected to his awakening at all. This was clearly the first time in his life he had ever laid eyes on this specific hourglass. Yet, a bizarre sense of déjà vu washed over him, as if the artifact had been custom forged for him alone. That intense familiarity practically screamed at him, mixed with a chilling sense of the unknown. Even Zane couldn't pinpoint whether the emotion was dread or pure craving. Bang! The flimsy door was violently kicked open. A hulking brute barged in, barking, "You the fresh meat?" The brute impatiently ordered Zane to stop playing dead and get his ass to work. Zane wiped his hands and shot back coldly. If someone had actually told me where this shithole dorm was, I wouldn't be wasting my time here. Before he could blink, the brute's massive fist smashed into his face, sending him crashing violently across the room. The brute stomped toward him, roaring at him to shut his damn mouth, because down here, bottom feeders like Zane had zero right to talk back. In this meat grinder of a mine, anyone who dared to run their mouth better be prepared to have their bones broken. Zane lay on the floor, swallowing the copper taste of blood. If he wasn't desperate to hide his sand abilities, he would have already snapped this piece of shit's neck, barehanded. The brute kicked him like a dead dog, ordering him to shut up and follow. Talk about hitting rock bottom. Right now, literally any stray dog in this camp dared to piss on him. But a ruthless glint flashed in his eyes. It wouldn't be long before he reclaimed his power, and when that day came, he was going to slowly rip the scumbag's head off. Wiping the blood from his mouth, Zane followed the brute to the gaping maw of Mine Area 3. The overseer, Park Manhwa, waved a hand, ordering his lapdogs to toss Zane some battered mining gear, before commanding him to get down the shaft immediately. Puffing on a cheap cigarette, Park sneered out the tyrannical terms. Gear maintenance and rotten food would be deducted from Zane's blood money, and every single magic crystal he dug up belonged to the boss. Zane narrowed his eyes and asked, "Exactly how much is the daily wage? If I'm selling my life, I want the numbers straight." Smash! The next second, a heavy iron hammer swung down, directly caving in the safety helmet on Zane's head. Park Manhwa pointed a finger at his nose and roared, "Do I need to cave your skull in before you learn the damn rules? The cost of that broken helmet is going on your tab too, so you better get that through your thick skull." Then, like tossing out trash, Park assigned Zane to Mine Tunnel 972. A miner nearby went pale and stuttered, trying to warn them that Tunnel 972 currently didn't have any air pressure. Before he could finish, Park viciously kicked him. "One more word out of you, and you're going down that hole instead of him." Park grabbed Zane by the collar and gave a death order. Dig up a magic crystal or die down there as fertilizer. If he dared to crawl back up empty-handed, Park would skin him alive. Accompanied by the grinding gears of the elevator, Zane slowly descended into the pitch-black depths of the mine. The foreman who escorted him down swallowed hard, muttering that Zane's luck was absolute garbage. Right when that lunatic Park had lost everything at the gambling tables and desperately needed fresh meat to fill the quota, Zane had been served up as the perfect scapegoat. Zane surveyed the suffocating rock walls, deliberately faking a weak, mocking tone. "With skin this delicate? I'm not gonna lose a limb down here, am I?" Hearing that, the foreman's hand gripping the lantern violently trembled. He stared dead into the endless dark, his voice shaking violently. "You don't need to worry about getting hurt, because no one who enters this tunnel has ever made it out alive." Accompanied by the heavy grinding of rusted gears, Zane was sent deep into Mine Tunnel 972. But just as he stepped out of the cabin, ready to start working, the foreman silently stepped back into the elevator and slammed the iron gate shut. Zane never expected the bastard to actually abandon him in this hellhole. The foreman had just mentioned that over a dozen people had vanished here without a trace, 4 of them familiar faces, no bodies, no clues, and absolutely no explanation for their disappearance. No wonder that piece of shit had sneered and told him not to worry about getting hurt. He had planned to make Zane disappear from the very beginning, and now he had actually gone through with it, leaving Zane here to wait for death alone. Pure rage spiked through Zane. He cursed through gritted teeth. Just because he pissed off that scumbag Park Manhwa, they were openly dumping him into a death trap? While Zane was seething with anger, the hammer in his hand suddenly slipped. Zane cursed under his breath. His luck was truly rock bottom. Now he had even lost his only damn weapon. Forcing his anger down, he used the faint light to observe the dead, eerie tunnel. He had been too blinded by rage to notice it earlier, but the mana density inside this underground shaft was terrifyingly high. Could the miners really not sense it just because they were ordinary humans? And the deeper he went, the thicker the mana became. A normal person exposed to this environment would have collapsed from mana overload by now, bleeding from their eyes. God only knew where all this horrifying energy was leaking from. After fumbling in the dark for a moment, Zane found the dropped hammer on the ground. Unfortunately, the wooden handle had snapped clean in half, rendering it completely useless. To make matters worse, his boot suddenly sank into something vile and squishy. The next second, the bedrock beneath him gave way, and a massive abyss tore open like a gaping maw. Zane had no time to process how the hell this sinkhole had appeared. But the cause didn't matter anymore. The most fatal problem now was what monstrosity was waiting at the bottom, and whether the fall alone would turn him into a bloody smear. A violent wave of weightlessness hit him. Zane's body lost all control as he plummeted straight into the abyss. Bizarrely, the moment he fell, the broken hammer and shattered helmet were left behind on the crumbling edge, as if isolated by an invisible force. With the wind roaring in his ears, Zane finally understood exactly how those dozen missing bastards had vanished into thin air. Swallowed by the endless dark, the brutal impact soon knocked him unconscious. While blacked out, heavy memories flooded his mind like a tidal wave. He dreamt of his childhood, of the day his parents tossed him aside like garbage. Driven to the brink of madness by starvation, he eventually scrounged like a stray dog and stole a piece of meat. Because of that single theft, a mob of street thugs cornered him in a dead-end alley and beat him half to death. It wasn't until Zane fought back in pure desperation and slaughtered the ringleader that he discovered the bastard's older brother was an elite awakened. From that day on, he lived like a rat in the gutters, forced into a blind, endless life on the run. He was utterly sick of living that pathetic, crawling existence. He didn't know how long had passed before he woke up with a splitting headache. The air around him was so scorching, it felt like it was going to ignite his lungs. He pressed his hand against the ground, his expression dropping instantly as he realized something was horribly wrong. His heart sank. His worst nightmare had come true. He had definitely fallen through an unknown spatial portal. If this hellhole really was an alternate dimension connected by a portal, it meant he was now trapped inside a colossal death labyrinth, and making it out alive would be next to impossible. Suddenly, a small piece of rubble fell from above. Zane instinctively caught it, and a tearing, burning pain instantly seared his palm. The horrifying heat forced him to violently flick the stone away, like it was live electricity. The intense pain proved this was no nightmare. Even back in New Soul, hunters were thoroughly prepped for the brutal extremes of dungeon environments. The choking dust filling the air was unmistakably scorched volcanic ash. If he didn't find an exit soon, his lungs would be completely fried. With that in mind, Zane ripped off a chunk of his pant leg without a second thought. He needed a makeshift gas mask, fast. If this damn labyrinth had an entrance, it had to have an exit. The most logical bet was that towering peak, the absolute highest point in the dungeon. Standing still would only get him roasted alive by the heat and ash. With no monsters in sight, this was his only window to move. Zane pushed off the ground, sprinting at full speed. A death trap like this wasn't going to make him roll over and give up. He leaped with all his strength, barely clearing the gap to land on the rocky steps across from him. Suddenly, the stone beneath his boots cracked and gave way. Just as Zane plummeted toward the boiling lava, his survival instincts kicked in, and he desperately slammed his hands onto the remaining ledge, catching himself. He wasn't about to let a pool of magma scare him to death. Gritting his teeth, Zane pulled himself up and hauled his body back onto solid ground. But the adrenaline only fueled his murderous rage. Zane swore to himself. The second he got out of here, Park Man-ho was a dead man, but he immediately forced a scorching breath into his lungs, shutting down his fury. He knew better than anyone, losing his cool in an extreme environment was a guaranteed death sentence. He had to survive, no matter the cost. He would claw, fight, and drag himself through hell if it meant finding a way out of here. Staring at the distant peak, Zane calculated that he needed 4 more extreme jumps to clear the gap. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Thinking was useless now. Keeping him alive was a job for his legs. Lowering his center of gravity, Zane coiled his muscles, ready for the next sprint. His life wasn't going to end in this suffocating hole. But Zane never sensed the horrifying predator lurking beneath the magma. Its jaws were already unhinged, waiting for him to jump straight into its trap. With a deafening, explosive splash, the colossal beast breached the surface and swallowed Zane whole. Its massive body immediately sank back into the boiling lava lake. Suddenly, the magma where it had submerged began violently bubbling. The monster's submerged body started thrashing in uncontrollable agony. Boom! A massive bloody crater was blown straight through its armored hide. From deep inside the beast's stomach, Zane had detonated his ability, blasting a brutal exit out of the creature's flesh. Even Zane was shocked. He could actually manipulate the volcanic ash. The domain of his sand ability was terrifyingly wider than he had realized. Covered in acidic gore, he dragged himself out of the beast. He had escaped the danger, but his stamina was entirely drained. The dungeon's climate was a deadlier killer than its monsters. Surging heat waves and toxic ash flooded his airways. Zane felt like his lungs were igniting from the inside. Every breath felt like inhaling razor blades. His vision blurred. He felt like he was on the absolute brink of death. His fists clenched automatically, nails biting deep into his palms. Barely a minute ago, he swore he would survive. He hadn't even lived long enough to experience a real relationship yet. Dying here as a roasted corpse was way too pathetic. So even if the Grim Reaper himself came knocking, Zane was going to spit in his face and refuse to die. The next second, Zane channeled his ability, a crazy survival plan already forming in his head. He was going to fish one of those magma crocodiles out of the lava, slaughter it, and skin it to craft a fireproof cloak. Since he had managed to blast through a monster's stomach from the inside earlier, killing one from the outside shouldn't be too hard either. But just as Zane was about to strike, a raspy voice caught him completely off guard. What an interesting ability, controlling sand, how fascinating. Zane's head snapped up, his pupils shrinking in absolute, stunned disbelief. How the hell could another human survive in this hellish, boiling abyss? To make it even crazier, the person standing before him was a withered old man. The old man stared at Zane with manic excitement, a twisted grin on his face that made his intentions impossible to read. In the old man's hand was a battered, unassuming blade. The next instant, the old man launched himself into the air like a phantom, leaving a violent afterimage in his wake, under Zane's utterly shocked gaze. The old man brought his blade crashing down, executing a devastating slash straight across the emerging crocodile monster's back. The moment the strike landed, the entire subterranean cavern violently shuddered. Boiling lava erupted into the air like a tsunami. The sheer destructive force of that single attack defied all human logic. The terrifying sonic boom nearly ruptured Zane's eardrums, plunging him into a state of absolute ringing deafness for a moment. Fighting off the extreme dizziness, he looked up at the massive creature. To his absolute horror, the heavily armored crocodile monster had been split cleanly in half with surgical precision, while the old man stood there without a single drop of blood on him. This was definitely not some ordinary top-tier awakened. This old monster was a terrifying entity, existing on a completely different dimensional plane. Then, the old man slowly raised his foot. Boom! With a seemingly casual stomp, he crushed the solid bedrock, caving it into a massive crater. Looking down at him from above, the old man ordered coldly, "Now, we are going to discuss your name. I'm giving you exactly 3 seconds." Without a shred of emotion, he immediately began the deadly countdown. The cold countdown quickly hit 2. But Zane's eardrums were still ringing violently, his brain completely short-circuiting from the apocalyptic strike he had just witnessed. 3 seconds vanished in a flash. An impatient, murderous glint flashed in the old man's eyes when he assumed the brat was ignoring him. Without hesitating, he twisted his wrist, fully intending to erase this ungrateful trash from existence. At that absolute hair's breadth of a second, the ringing in Zane's ears finally faded. Catching the lethal intent the moment his hearing returned, Zane desperately roared, "Wait!" Gritting his teeth, Zane spoke rapidly. "I don't know what's going on, but please hold up. My name is Zane. Whatever this is, we can talk it out." The old man paused his swing, clicking his tongue in amusement. He mocked that a name like Zane sounded truly pathetic and cheap. In the next breath, he casually flicked a wave of sword aura behind him, slicing the towering magma mountain blocking Zane's view clean in half. Amidst the deafening roar of the collapsing mountain, the old man arrogantly declared his own name, Dylan. Every muscle in Zane's body locked up tight. He couldn't begin to fathom what this psycho old man was trying to pull. Swallowing hard, he defensively tested the waters. Blowing up that mountain just now, was that supposed to be a threat? "I'm grateful you saved my neck back there. But isn't your way of saying hello a little extreme?" Dylan sneered without an ounce of mercy, calling him a blind idiot who didn't even realize he had just stepped right into a monster's death trap. Dylan casually explained that this extremely rare phenomenon only triggered when a dungeon suffered from severe mana oversaturation. To prevent a total spatial collapse, the dungeon would violently rip open a secondary entrance to vent the volatile energy. At the same time, that violent rift acted like a black hole, violently dragging any living creature nearby straight into its depths. That was the natural trap they had fallen into. Most hunters could spend their entire miserable lives in the wastelands and never see one. Dylan mocked Zane's luck as being truly bottom of the barrel. Though ultimately, they had that psycho park manho to blame. Zane snapped impatiently. "Then how the hell do I get out of here? I can't just wait around to die." Dylan didn't answer directly. He simply told Zane to focus his mana into his retinas, promising that in just a second, Zane would understand why he had called him a blind idiot. Swallowing his anxiety, Zane immediately did as he was told. He carefully channeled his internal mana straight into his eyes, re-examining the dead, boiling magma fields around them. Suddenly, the massive, twisted silhouette of a monster phased into his vision like a ghost. Zane drew in a sharp breath. So Dylan had been locked in a deathmatch with this invisible behemoth the entire time. He wasn't aiming that sword aura at Zane at all. Dylan coldly explained that this species of magical beast possessed absolute active camouflage. Clueless prey usually didn't even realize they were dead until they were already being digested. A cold sweat broke out across Zane's back. A predator the size of a small hill had been crouching right under his nose, and his so-called heightened senses hadn't picked up a single damn thing. If Dylan hadn't unleashed that apocalyptic slash, Zane would already be a pile of crushed bones. Thinking about it, Dylan had actually saved his life twice since they met. The sheer, unfathomable depth of this withered old man's power was completely beyond the comprehension of a bottom-tier awakened like Zane. Zane swallowed hard and couldn't help asking, "Who exactly are you?" But honestly, more than the old man's identity, Zane desperately wanted to know what the hell this magma-filled purgatory was. Dylan nonchalantly stated that this place was what the world called a dungeon, and it doubled as his own personal hunting ground. As for who he was, Dylan arrogantly told Zane to open his eyes wide and witness it for himself. With that, Dylan slowly drew the long blade strapped to his back. Without any flashy movements, he casually unleashed a jet-black arc of sword aura toward the distant mountain range. A terrifying sonic boom instantly sucked the oxygen from the air. The piercing screech of the blade tearing through space nearly ruptured Zane's eardrums. Zane clamped his hands over his ears, staring blankly ahead, his brain completely short-circuited, trying to process what the crazy old man was doing. But the very next second, the dead skies blackened as a massive, suffocating swarm of flying monsters blotted out the light, stirred into a frenzy like an agitated hornet's nest. Dylan glanced down at Zane with absolute condescension. "If you want to walk out of here alive, if you want to prove a piece of trash like you still has some value, then draw your weapon and start killing." Before the words even left his mouth, a dark blur shot past Zane's cheek like a bullet. A sharp sting flared up on his face. Only then did Zane realize with absolute horror that these monsters were moving faster than the naked eye could track. If he stood there like a deer in the headlights for even a second longer, he would be shredded into meat paste. The swarm darted and dive-bombed through the air with absurd, erratic speed. Scrambling across the narrow rocks, Zane couldn't even find a gap to retreat. What drove him completely insane was that the entire flock was hyper-fixated on tearing apart his left leg. He aggressively pulled on his mana, highly compressing the sand at his fingertips and firing off sand bullets like a rapid-fire shotgun. But every single shot hit dead air. He couldn't graze a single feather. Instead, failing to dodge in time, Zane found himself getting slashed open by razor-sharp talons, again and again. Pure survival panic set in. Neither his sandblasts nor his natural vision could even remotely keep up with the monster's speed. If he didn't figure out a counterattack right now, he was going to be eaten alive down to the bone. Dylan had made an exception and saved him twice. If Zane died pathetically to a flock of overgrown birds, he truly would be the useless idiot Dylan called him. Suddenly, amidst the desperate fight for his life, Zane noticed something terrifyingly wrong. The world had gone dead silent. Dylan was standing just feet away, shouting at him, but Zane could only see the old man's lips moving frantically. Absolute, maddening silence filled his head. That sword strike earlier had completely destroyed his hearing. Stripped of his auditory warnings, he had to find another way to track the enemy's movements immediately. Relying purely on mortal eyes was a guaranteed death sentence. Pushed to the absolute brink, his mind locked onto one final, insane gamble. He had to overclock his retinas, forcing every ounce of his mana directly into his eyes. He would shatter the limits of his human vision, lock on to the afterimages of the swarm, and forcefully read their kinetic trajectories before they could deliver the killing blow. This was exactly the survival law Dylan had just demonstrated to him. In this hellscape, stop blindly trusting your mortal eyes. You have to learn to see through the flow of mana. Before the thought even settled, a crow-like monstrosity dive-bombed toward him like a streak of black lightning. But, this time, the world shifted in Zane's vision. He clearly tracked the monster's crimson kinetic trajectory. With a sharp flick of his wrist, a heavily compacted shield of sand instantly materialized, dead stopping the fatal strike. Hanging on the edge of life and death, Zane finally achieved total clarity. Vision was merely a secondary tool. Sensing the surging mana within a predator was the true core. The purpose of eyes wasn't just to see, but to pierce through. The absolute best moment to launch a lethal counterattack was the split second the beast's mana breached his absolute defense zone. Without a doubt, from the moment Dylan drew his blade, this combat instinct was already carved into his very bones. The old man fought as if he had a god's eye view, effortlessly predicting every single shift on the battlefield before it happened. The unfathomable depth of his power sent a violent chill down Zane's spine. Just what kind of monster was this withered old man? Just then, Dylan unleashed another domineering arc of sword aura, a manic, bloodthirsty gleam flashing in his eyes. Fascinating. It's been a long time since my blood boiled like this. With a single, devastating slash, a colossal crocodile monster was cleanly decapitated, its mutilated corpse crashing heavily into the boiling magma. But that mere taste of slaughter wasn't nearly enough to satisfy Dylan's frenzy. Like a god of death, he instantly locked onto his next prey. The blade flashed like a streak of silver light. Before the charging monsters could even let out a shriek of agony, they were sliced into perfectly even halves. This shriveled old man was so absurdly powerful he outright defied the laws of physics. These terrifying, nightmare-inducing dungeon beasts were as fragile as wet paper in front of him. Under that battered blade, slaughtering these apex predators was as effortless as scything through dead wheat. Casually flicking the black blood off his blade, Dylan scoffed in annoyance. He complained that he had barely finished his warm-up and the trash was already dead, grumbling about how barren the dungeon's ecosystem had become lately. Judging by his familiar, exhausted tone, this psycho had definitely been haunting this dungeon for countless years. Zane looked around in sheer disbelief. As far as the eye could see, every single magical beast had been reduced to minced meat under Dylan's blade. The shock left Zane completely breathless, but this was a blessing in disguise. Since the monsters in this sector had been entirely wiped out, he finally had a real shot at escaping alive. But the second Zane let out a sigh of relief, the solid bedrock beneath his boots began violently shuddering and cracking open. He cursed viciously under his breath. Of course, this cannibalistic dungeon wasn't going to let him walk away that easily. Suddenly, an absolutely terrifying guttural roar erupted from the abyssal depths. The sonic boom was so physically heavy, it nearly shattered Zane's freshly recovered eardrums. The oppressive mana shockwave was pure agony. Zane's legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the scorching stone, violently dry-heaving as his internal organs twisted in nausea. Clamping his hands over his bleeding ears, Zane screamed at Dylan, "What the hell is that thing? Is the dungeon collapsing?" Dylan just smirked, casually stating that it was the roar of the big boss. The so-called boss was the ultimate apex lord, lurking at the deepest core of every dungeon, the absolute source fueling this twisted spatial distortion. And this ultimate prey was the exact reason Dylan had stepped into this magma purgatory in the first place. When the colossal, sky-blotting behemoth finally ascended from the abyss, Zane's pupils instantly shrank to pinpricks of pure terror. But Dylan trembled with absolute euphoria. Slowly raising his long blade, he let out a cruel, chilling laugh. "You finally decided to show yourself, you beast." The very next second, the monstrosity unfurled wings that eclipsed the sky, unleashing a deafening, world-shattering roar. This living embodiment of absolute despair was none other than the infamous Crimson Wyvern. Despite carrying the title of a dragon, it lacked the pure bloodline of a true dragon. In the Hunter Association's threat logs, it was merely classified as a B-rank entity, but no one dared to underestimate that rating. As a Lord-class B-rank beast dominating an entire dungeon, its destructive capability was on par with a walking natural disaster. Just like the classification system used for Human Awakened, the blinding red aura radiating from its scales signified the red domain, proving it was an absolute combat weapon born purely for slaughter and annihilation. Right at that moment, the monster somehow unleashed an ice attribute ability in the middle of a superheated environment. A freezing spike radiating absolute zero shot out from its jaws, tearing through the heat waves and rocketing straight towards Zane and Dylan. Zane drew a sharp breath in shock, unleashing frost in a magma hell. This beast was literally breaking the laws of physics. Yet Dylan didn't even bat an eye. With a casual flick of his wrist, he swung his blade and cleanly split the devastating cryogenic attack in two. The lethal frost surged harmlessly past them on both sides, leaving Zane, who was standing right below, completely unscathed. In that single instant, every survival rule Zane had spent years building in the wasteland was utterly shattered. Everything he had learned felt like a pathetic joke, because in the face of a monster like Dylan, all those so-called laws of reality meant absolutely nothing. The withered old man's power had blasted light years past the ceiling of Zane's comprehension. High above, the enraged black dragon violently clenched its mountain-crushing claws. Sadly for the beast, its frenzied attacks still couldn't even graze the hem of Dylan's clothes, grasping at nothing but empty air. But, in the very next second, the black dragon's wrist twisted backward in a grotesque, anatomically impossible angle, tightly snaring Dylan's frail body in its grip. Immediately after, it unhinged its massive jaws. Terrifying magical energy hyper-compressed in its throat, ready to blast Dylan into ash at point-blank range. Facing this fatal breath attack, Dylan merely let out a blood-chilling manic laugh. With a sudden burst of brute strength from a single hand, he forcefully clamped the black dragon's massive jaws shut. The apocalyptic magical payload it had gathered detonated violently inside its own mouth. Looking at the agonizing beast, Dylan grinned sadistically. "Hurts, doesn't it, Drake? Don't worry. Pain like that is over in a flash. I'll be the one to put you out of your misery. Because today is the official funeral for the Black Dragon, Drake." With that, he gripped his hilt with both hands and brought his blade crashing down, slicing brutally into the dragon's spine. Hearing Dylan loudly announce the Black Dragon's funeral, Zane, who was flattened against the ground, roared internally. This wasn't just the dragon's funeral. This was about to turn into his own damn burial. Could these god-tier lunatics not take their apocalyptic deathmatch somewhere else? Did they really have to bring the whole world down with them? Watching the shockwave barrel toward him, Zane pushed his mana to the absolute limit, raising a heavy, compacted wall of sand to shield himself. Boom! The sand shield shuddered violently, but miraculously, he actually managed to block the first wave. Even so, the sheer kinetic force pushed him dangerously backward, his boots carving deep trenches into the stone. Just the residual shockwave alone was horrifyingly powerful. Zane couldn't even begin to fathom the sheer world-ending kinetic energy Dylan was tanking head-on at ground zero. Yet, right in the eye of the storm, Dylan was laughing like a maniac. "Absolutely magnificent, Drake. I fucking love you. To think you still had enough life left to pull off a death throw like this." In the eyes of that psychotic old man, this devastating, landscape-altering battle was as casual as stepping on ants in his own backyard playground. Cackling wildly, Dylan unleashed a downward slash, smashing the black dragon's colossal body directly into the boiling magma lake with the force of a falling meteor. But tragically, a fresh tsunami of battle aftershocks violently swept towards Zane's direction once again. Watching the wall of destruction closing in, Zane cursed viciously. Damn it all. That crazy old bastard didn't give a single shit whether Zane lived or died, desperately throwing up a final veil of sand to protect his face. Zane was still brutally swept off his feet and launched into the air. The shockwave's raw power was hopelessly overwhelming, sending his body tumbling out of control across the jagged rocks like a discarded rag doll. Disoriented and bruised, Zane's eyes suddenly snapped open, his heart skipping a massive beat. He was rolling straight off the cliff edge, inches away from plummeting into the magma below. His expression froze, pupils dilating in pure terror. Was he seriously going to be roasted alive here? He had literally just awakened, and he scored the ultimate limitless sand ability. To be vaporized so pathetically right now would be the universe's sickest joke. He hadn't even scratched the surface of his true power. Digging his fingers desperately into the cliff's edge, Zane glared up at the two monsters still clashing in the sky, cursing their entire bloodlines. These two insufferable bastards were playing God, and they were dragging a mortal like him straight to hell with them. Meanwhile, Dylan's deathmatch with the Black Dragon Drake had escalated to its most brutal climax. The dragon's arrogant head had been battered so viciously, its scales were shattered, brutally pinned and dragged against the scorching magma ground. Driven to absolute desperation, Drake suddenly unhinged its massive jaws, meeting Dylan's manic, bloodthirsty gaze. The dragon poured every last ounce of its life force into a devastating, point-blank energy shockwave. The blast was like a nuclear detonation, instantly vaporizing the solid bedrock in its path into pure ash. This suicidal, world-ending strike should have erased the human before it from existence. But what the Lord-class beast could never have anticipated was a massive, battered greatsword tearing through the sky above, crashing down to brutally and flawlessly impale its heart. Drake's colossal body went rigid, letting out a horrific, blood-curdling death shriek. Dylan had spent a full year wandering this deadly desert like a ghost, hunting the Black Dragon's trail with absolute obsession. Because the only way to reforge his shattered greatsword was to sacrifice the boiling heart of a B-rank lord. And now, it was finally time for the beast to offer up its heart. The broken blade buried in the dragon's chest seemingly came alive, greedily siphoning Drake's life essence. The boiling dragon blood within its veins was being violently drained by the demonic blade at a terrifying speed. Gradually, the pitch-black blade was stained a horrifying crimson, as if some ancient, forbidden seal had been violently torn apart. The oppressive aura radiating from the greatsword skyrocketed, and the shattered blade actually began to regrow and reforge itself under the baptism of dragon blood. In just a few breaths, the ultimate weapon was completely reborn in blood. Dylan gripped the scalding hilt, his eyes filled with morbid obsession. Old friend, you're finally alive again, and you're even hungrier, even more vicious than before. Zane, who had just barely escaped death, peeked out from behind the rubble and yelled, "You crazy old bastard, you've been talking to a damn sword this whole time. Have you finally gone senile? But you actually soloed that black dragon. Your power is straight up bullshit." Dylan turned his head, raising an eyebrow, genuinely surprised that the little bug was still breathing. Zane himself was dripping with cold sweat. If he had not burned his mana to instantly form a sand shield when the shockwave hit, he would be a pile of cooked meat right now. It seemed a gutter rat like him had a life tougher than a cockroach. Honestly, he had Dylan's merciless, indiscriminate bombing to thank for forcefully pushing his survival reflexes past their absolute limits. Dylan threw his head back and laughed wildly. For a fragile little idiot, surviving this long is actually a damn good job. Before he finished, Zane looked up in horror. The spatial dome above was peeling apart like a shattered mirror. With the Lord dead, the dungeon's core was collapsing. They had to get the hell out immediately. Before Zane could even run, he was bewildered as Dylan suddenly grabbed him by the back of the collar like a stray kitten. Dylan flashed a wicked, extremely vicious grin. The next second, the old man's massive arm flexed, hurling Zane straight toward the spatial rift in mid-air like a human cannonball. Wind rushing down his throat, Zane flailed mid-air and screamed furiously, "You crazy old bastard, just you wait." After a violent wave of weightlessness, Zane crashed hard onto a scorching sand dune. Taking in the familiar, desolate wasteland around him, he gasped heavily for air, completely unable to believe he had actually crawled out of that suicide mission dungeon, alive. The spatial rift warped, and Dylan casually strolled out, resting the greatsword on his shoulder. He dusted himself off, and explained that when a dungeon collapsed, the man-eating trap would invert into an exit for the survivors. Then, looking down at Zane from above, Dylan's tone suddenly turned dead serious. "Listen closely, brat. I need that sand manipulation ability of yours. But right now you're so pathetically weak, you aren't even fit to carry my boots. So, I'll be merciful, and give you 2 paths." Dylan pointed the flat of his blade toward the desert on the right. "Path 1, crawl to the right. That leads back to the starter camp. You can go back to your original cesspool and keep living like mud meant to be stepped on. As for Path 2, Dylan's lips curled into a manic grin. "Follow me. I will mold you into a terrifying idiot, 100 times stronger than you are now." Zane sat in the sand, completely dumbfounded. He had absolutely no idea what this crazy old bastard saw in him. And he did not even dare to imagine how long he would be walking this point of no return if he actually sold his soul to this lunatic. Dylan didn't know the answer either. It could be months, years, or even long, agonizing decades. Until the absolute end arrived, no one could predict it. But right now, he needed Zane to make a decision immediately. Would he crawl back to his pathetic, mud-like existence? Or would he throw himself entirely into a life-or-death gamble with barely a 1% chance of survival? Dylan looked down at him and demanded coldly, "Now, make your choice." Zane let out a dry, cynical laugh, feeling like this crazy old bastard was just messing with him. Apparently, the old man's brain really had been fried by the magma. With a face full of mockery, Zane asked, "You want me to give up my moldy cot and the crumbling roof over my head in the mines, just to follow you into this roasting desert and die?" Dylan nodded without a ripple of emotion. "That is exactly what I mean, so you'd better choose quickly." Since he had put it that bluntly, there was absolutely nothing left for Zane to hesitate over. He marched straight up to Dylan, gritting his teeth. "I'm going with you. That's my choice." Zane was the kind of ruthless survivor who always repaid a grudge, but right now, he was weaker than an ant. He had zero capital to demand revenge, and more importantly, this arrogant old bastard Dylan was already permanently nailed to his revenge list. Zane stared fearlessly into his eyes. "Out of everyone I've ever met, you're the absolute biggest freak. And I have a gut feeling I'll never meet a monster stronger than you in this lifetime." Dylan threw his head back and roared with laughter. "Looks like you aren't completely blind yet." Zane's eyes turned vicious as he added, "And I'm dead certain that as long as I tag along with an old dog like you, I'll eventually become stronger than you. Sooner or later, I'm going to kill you myself. Hearing a brat whose balls hadn't even dropped publicly threaten to murder him, Dylan didn't get angry. He just found it incredibly amusing. Then I'll be waiting. One day, you're gonna pay the price for that naive arrogance. With that, he was done wasting words. Quit dragging your feet, dumbass, and keep up. The road ahead of us is long enough that you can't even see the end. After trekking through the scorching sun for 10 grueling hours, Zane despairingly realized Dylan's pace was as steady as ever, while his own stamina had been completely drained empty. His throat feeling like sandpaper, Zane desperately begged Dylan to stop and let them catch their breath. But Dylan was completely deaf to the heavy dog-like panting trailing behind him. Being ignored like that pushed Zane to the brink of a breakdown. He roared hoarsely, "You old fossil, can you at least give me a damn answer?" The temperature was absurdly high, definitely spiking past 50 degrees Celsius. Even the air was violently distorting from the horrifying heat. The cursed, boiling sand beneath his boots made every single step feel like walking on hot irons. If he kept pushing like this, he was either going to drop from heat stroke or turn into a dehydrated mummy. Dylan finally stopped and glanced back at him with a frigid stare. "You really are hopeless. You're sitting on a mountain of gold and begging for scraps. You haven't even utilized 1% of your own ability." Zane's brain short-circuited. He had no idea what kind of bullshit the old man was spouting. Dylan ruthlessly mocked him, saying it was utterly pathetic that an awakened who could manipulate sand was actively being tortured by the sand beneath his feet. Zane fiercely cursed in his heart. It was easy for this crazy old bastard to preach. He had barely awakened a few days ago. How was he supposed to master it all without a manual? But Dylan scoffed at the cowardly excuse. So what? Even if you awakened exactly 1 minute ago, it is still a power that belongs entirely to you. From the exact second you opened your eyes and awakened, you should have been squeezing it and exploiting it by any means necessary. Pushed to the edge, Zane lashed out recklessly, arguing that he was nothing but a bottom-tier F-rank piece of trash and couldn't possibly compare to a max-level fossil like Dylan. That single sentence instantly triggered Dylan's wrath. He teleported in front of Zane like a ghost, radiating a suffocatingly oppressive aura. Swallow that retarded excuse right now and never say it again. In this cannibalistic hellhole, who the fuck cares if the tag on your chest says F rank or S rank? Do you think those S ranks were born as untouchable gods? Even if they were, it just means they hit the genetic jackpot when they were born. Are you telling me that just because you didn't get lucky at birth, you're going to give up struggling like a pathetic worm and just drift along in the mud? In my eyes, you've already hit the damn jackpot. Lucky doesn't even begin to cover it. The power you awakened is practically a rule-breaking glitch. You absolute idiot. You have no idea what kind of trump card you're holding. As he chewed Zane out, Dylan's icy tone softened just a fraction. That is all I'm going to say. Shut your mouth, stop your bitching, and actually use your brain to figure out how to control the sand. If the brain connecting your limbs is just dead meat, then you'll never be anything but trash. He reached out with his calloused hand and clapped it heavily onto Zane's shoulder. Remember, this power belongs to you and you alone. You are the only one who can figure out its temper, and you are the only one who can shatter its chains and truly make this power your own. As he spoke, Dylan's fingers unconsciously tightened. Zane had absolutely no way of knowing what kind of indelible, bloody scars the sand ability had left on this old man's violent past. The next second, Zane's collarbone cracked under the unbearable pressure. A terrifying, murderous intent flashed in Dylan's eyes as he delivered a cold warning. "You dumbass. If you dare waste this power, I swear I will slaughter you myself." After that, Zane threw every ounce of his focus into developing his ability. Pushing his mind, he violently wrenched clumps of loose sand from the ground, suspending them haphazardly in midair. After testing his limits, he figured his absolute control radius was currently capped at roughly 50 meters. The range was still pathetically short, but for right now, it would do. If he could use the sand to bypass the sheer exhaustion of walking through the dunes, he could save a massive amount of stamina. With a thought, Zane stomped his boot down, hyper-compressing the sand beneath his feet until it hardened like concrete. Walking across the loose, shifting desert suddenly felt as stable as striding across a paved road. This newly discovered trick made Zane a little cocky. He immediately spun around to show off to Dylan, boasting that he would no longer sink into the dunes and that walking now took zero effort. But his arrogance faded fast as he noticed a fatal flaw. Forcing the sand to harden constantly drained his mana at an alarming rate. If he tried to use this for a long-distance trek, he would run completely dry before making it 10 kilometers. After a few more clumsy attempts, he changed tactics. Instead of hardening the environment, he channeled the mana directly into his own legs to counteract the resistance of the sand. The mana cost plummeted, but his pace remained just as light. Listening to Zane loudly bragging about his minor breakthrough, Dylan didn't even raise an eyelid. He simply crossed his arms and slowly closed his eyes. There were no shortcuts to developing an ability. It was simply a matter of endless, grueling trial and error. That kind of stubborn persistence was the only real asset a brat like him had. Watching him coldly from the sidelines, Dylan knew the truth. Although Zane's official rank was still a laughable F-class, the microcontrol and physical adaptability he had shown in just a few hours had already left so-called D-rank awakened completely in the dust. The dormant potential hiding inside this kid's body was genuinely monstrous. Meanwhile, totally absorbed in his own progress, Zane used his mana-reinforced legs to dart right next to Dylan. He smugly provoked him. "Hey, old fossil, see that? Use a little brainpower, and walking in this shithole is like taking a stroll in the park." Not knowing when to shut up, he continued his mockery. "A brute force dinosaur like you definitely can't pull this off, huh? You're stuck sinking into the sand with every step, moving slower than a damn turtle." Thud. The next second, Dylan ruthlessly slammed his fist straight down onto the crown of Zane's skull, making him see stars. Pulling his fist back, Dylan warned him coldly, "If you don't shut your mouth right now, I'll leave you behind. If you keep wasting your precious mana on luxury bullshit like walking comfortably, you'll be dead the second a monster shows up." Dylan shot him a glare, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We are on the clock here, idiot. Save your breath and save your mana for when you actually need it." Night soon fell over the endless sea of sand. Zane woke up to a throbbing headache, only to be instantly greeted by Dylan's harsh scolding. "You useless piece of trash. Passing out like a dead dog and making me waste valuable time waiting for you to wake up." Zane grimaced in pain. He had zero memory of this crazy old man ever taking care of him. The stinging, foul stench radiating from his wounds cruelly reminded him that whatever Dylan had smeared on him wasn't medicine, it was some kind of rancid, putrid sludge. Just as Zane was about to curse him out, a rock-hard piece of dried jerky smacked him right in the face. Sitting by the fire, Dylan tore off a chunk of jerky with his teeth and ordered Zane to eat and listen. He was going to talk about an era when he, too, had been as pathetic and weak as Zane. Dylan's voice was remarkably hoarse against the cold wind. "There used to be a time when even absolute trash like you, people with zero ability to protect themselves, people even more pathetic than you, could live safely until old age. Back then, society even glorified the idiots who protected the weak. Can you even comprehend a world that absurd? But as you've seen, that shitty world has been dead and buried for a long time. To a stray dog like you, born crawling in the wasteland, the strong eating the weak is just a law of nature. But me, I have never gotten used to this disgusting reality." Dylan's eyes suddenly turned incredibly dangerous as he locked onto Zane. "So, if you've already accepted your fate, then lie down in that ditch and wait to become rotten meat for the scavengers. If you don't want to die, then use your own damn legs and stand up, you idiot." After his harsh lecture, Dylan tossed another rock-hard piece of jerky at Zane's face, like throwing scraps to a beggar. Despite the hostility, Zane finally caught the underlying meaning in the old man's rant. He suspected that Dylan really was an ancient monster who had lived for countless years, though he couldn't begin to fathom how many centuries of bloody memories were stuffed into that withered body. Zane even had the crazy suspicion that Dylan was well over 100 years old, perhaps having witnessed firsthand how the blue planet had been reduced to this dead, sandy rock. In the flickering firelight, Dylan was still blankly chewing on that tooth-breaking jerky. Zane swallowed hard, unable to tell if the old man was actually chewing it or just swallowing the meat whole like a snake. Out here, in the lethal desert, where water was worth more than gold, swallowing food whole like a stone to conserve saliva was probably the most brutal and efficient way to eat. But if the old bastard had mentioned that earlier, Zane wouldn't have nearly chipped a tooth trying to bite it. Zane vaguely realized that this psycho wasn't just giving him a free meal, he was using the harshest methods possible to beat the ironclad rules of wasteland survival into his skull. But a lesson was a lesson, and this jerky was salty as hell. Feeling like his throat was literally on fire, Zane licked his cracked lips and shamelessly held out his hand. "Old fossil, give me another piece." The night deepened, and a freezing, bone-chilling cold completely swallowed the desert. Zane let out a violent sneeze, shivering uncontrollably. He had been roasting in 50-degree heat during the day, and now it felt like he had been tossed into an ice bath. He was finally learning the hard way just how terrifying the desert's temperature drops could be. What drove him even more insane was that the old psycho spent every single night muttering deliriously to that broken sword, making it impossible for Zane to catch any actual sleep. The old man's brain rot was definitely terminal. Unable to take the agonizing thirst anymore, feeling like rusted razor blades were lodged in his throat, Zane was about to ask Dylan for a sip of water. Instead, His eyes widened in pure outrage. Dylan was methodically wringing out a damp shirt, squeezing every last drop of the collected dew directly into his own mouth. Rage instantly spiked straight to Zane's brain. This shady old bastard was rotten to the core. He had quietly hoarded all the life-saving water for himself. Zane finally put two and two together. Dylan deliberately laid his clothes out on the dunes every night before sleeping to catch the condensation. Meanwhile, Zane, who had spent the entire night freezing like an idiot, was now reduced to humiliatingly sucking the pathetic amount of moisture off his own dirty sleeve. Drinking the sandy dew from his sleeve, Zane felt absolutely zero shame. Glaring daggers at the old man's relaxed back, he gritted his teeth and swore a vicious oath in his heart. "Just you wait, you old freak. I swear to God, one day I'm gonna string you up and bleed you dry." Just then, Dylan called Zane an idiot again. Zane immediately snapped back. "Wrong, I'm a total moron. Thanks for the compliment." Dylan had zero time to entertain his sarcasm. "Moron, do you feel anything strange beneath your feet?" Prompted by Dylan, Zane's nerves instantly pulled taut. That muffled vibration wasn't coming from just one spot. It was closing in from every direction at once. In just a few breaths, a swarm of blurry shadows had them completely boxed in. Under the faint light of dawn, Zane recognized the monsters. They were giant foot hyenas. These nocturnal predators had unfortunately crossed their path right at the break of dawn. Dylan watched coldly, half expecting the brat to scream for help again. But this time, he guessed wrong. Without even looking back, Zane launched a backhand strike and instantly blew a hyena's head to pieces. Zane no longer needed Dylan to clean up his messes. Against a swarming beast tide like this, Zane felt more than capable of handling it with his wide-range attacks. The next second, he gathered a violent sand vortex at his fingertips. Boom! With a deafening blast, the charging pack of hyenas was violently blown away like torn ragdolls. However, more bloodthirsty hyenas lunged from his blind spots. Zane aggressively splayed his fingers, and several thick sand spikes erupted from the earth, impaling the airborne attackers and sending them flying. He had already slaughtered plenty, but the pack kept surging up the dunes like an endless black tide. If he kept spamming wide-range attacks like this, his meager mana reserves would run dry in minutes. He needed a new strategy. Brainless brute force wouldn't get him to the end. He had to squeeze every single drop of efficiency out of his mana. Zane's mind raced, searching for a combat style that could deliver one-hit kills with minimal energy consumption. In that split second of distraction, a massive hyena seized the opening and clamped its jaws viciously around his forearm. The agonizing pain made Zane fly into a rage. Kicking the beast away, he roared, "I'm in the middle of thinking, you damn mutt. How dare you interrupt me?" That cursed hyena had ripped a bloody hole straight into his flesh. Gritting his teeth, Zane mocked himself. Looked like his arm just got a brand new air vent. Watching the pack lunge at him again with unhinged jaws, he finally realized it. He didn't need massive walls of sand. He just needed to punch fatal holes right through these bastards' skulls. Zane mentally cursed himself for forgetting this move. He immediately hypercompressed the loose sand, molding it into razor-sharp, high-pressure needles. The next second, the sand needles shot out like a rain of bullets, piercing straight through the hyena's skulls with brutal precision. Compared to Zane's desperate struggle for survival, Dylan's side of the battlefield looked like a casual stroll in a backyard. A suicidal hyena tried to ambush him from behind, clamping its jaws hard onto Dylan's leg. But with a sickening crunch of bone, the beast's proud, razor-sharp teeth shattered completely on impact. Dylan scoffed in amusement. "Are you pathetic little mutts trying to tickle me?" His eyes turned instantly icy. For mad dogs that dared to bite him, the only outcome was death. Seeing Dylan's stance, a cold sweat broke out on Zane's back. He hurriedly screamed, "Old lunatic, control your damn power. Don't drag me into the crossfire." But Dylan couldn't care less. With a casual flick of his wrist, he unleashed his physical sword technique, 10 Feathers. As the blade let out a low hum tearing through the air, an overwhelming wave of sword pressure crashed down, instantly crushing and blasting the surrounding hyena pack away. Zane cursed violently, burning his mana to form a thick sand shield just to barely survive the bone-scraping aftershock. That lawless old bastard knew perfectly well Zane was standing right there, yet he still ruthlessly unleashed a weapon of mass destruction. But as the dust settled, Zane stared at the terrifying cratered wasteland carved into the ground, completely frozen in shock. Was this guy even remotely human? Relying entirely on pure physical swordplay without casting a single high-tier magic skill, he could actually cause this level of apocalyptic destruction? With just one single strike, the entire hyena pack had been completely erased. At that moment, Dylan was standing atop the massive corpse of the hyena pack leader. What mildly surprised him was that this alpha commanding the beast tide was actually female. Just a split second before being instantly killed, this exceptionally ferocious beast had actually tried to fight back, erupting with blinding lightning abilities. Dylan stepped on its scorched fur and raised an eyebrow. Is that a field? It seems your threat level was far more dangerous than a simple B rank. The very next second, that massive violent bolt of lightning crashed down directly onto Dylan's head. Zane's heart skipped a beat, and he instinctively roared, "Watch out! Dodge it, you idiot!" But to Zane's absolute shock, Dylan didn't flinch. He simply reached out and crushed the high-voltage attack with his bare hand, as if the rock-shattering lightning was nothing more than a spark of static electricity. Zane's brain completely short-circuited. Apparently the phrase lethal threat simply did not exist in his old psycho's dictionary. After taking a direct hit from a fatal lightning strike, Dylan wasn't reduced to ash. Instead, he cracked his neck with a satisfied pop, as if the millions of volts had just given him a deep tissue massage to loosen up his joints. Rolling his shoulders lazily, Dylan sneered, "Electrotherapy is over. Now it's time for you to die, you mutt." Before the words even settled, the great sword flashed with overwhelming pressure, cleanly slicing the female alpha hyena in two. Zane mentally slapped himself, cursing his own stupidity for wasting even a millisecond worrying about a monster who could tear a dragon apart with his bare hands. As the dust settled, Dylan glanced back and raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised that the little trash was still breathing without a scratch on him. Ripping a sharp, jagged bone spike straight out of a hyena's skull, Dylan tossed it, noting that with a little grinding, it could pass for a weapon. Then, he carelessly threw a crude, blood-stained dagger straight at Zane's feet. Dylan laid down the new law. From this second on, Zane was strictly responsible for hunting his own meat and finding his own water. He wasn't getting another free drop from him ever again. The hyena's blood and organs were highly toxic, but the meat on their hindquarters was just clean enough that roasting it wouldn't immediately kill him. Dylan ordered him to stop standing around and start carving. Dawn was breaking, and the moment the sun fully rose, the temperature would spike to lethal levels. They needed to move. 2 hours later, the desert sun began its merciless, furnace-like bombardment. Chewing on a piece of tough, leathery hyena jerky, Zane laughed bitterly to himself. His mouth was full of grit, but at least he had solid meat in his gut. He wouldn't die a starving ghost today. His throat still felt like it was on fire, but in this hellish wasteland, just surviving to see the sun was a luxury. Besides, thanks to the mana-reinforced sand strides he had just developed, the physical toll of dragging his feet through the shifting dunes was drastically reduced. Feeling a little too confident, Zane sidled up to Dylan and recklessly provoked him. "Hey, old fossil, getting a little jealous? Age is catching up to you, isn't it? If you're struggling, I could always teach you a trick or two." The moment the words left his mouth, Dylan threw a brutal backhand, but this time, Zane was ready, smoothly dodging the strike with a cocky grin. Before he could even celebrate, a vicious elbow strike came crashing down from a blind spot, slamming directly onto the top of Zane's skull. Zane yelped as his face was planted firmly into the scorching sand, pulling his arm back. Dylan mocked him without an ounce of mercy. "Don't get cocky. Learning one parlor trick and immediately acting like you own the place is the fastest way to get yourself killed, especially around me." Rubbing the massive bump forming on his head, Zane hissed in pain. "I was just making a damn joke. I don't even have enough spit to swallow right now, and you still shove my face in the dirt." But this time, Zane noticed Dylan completely ignoring his complaints. At the exact same moment, the hairs on Zane's arms stood up. A bizarre, damp, cooling moisture had just drifted through the scorching air. For a split second, he thought the intense dehydration was causing him to hallucinate. But when he saw Dylan's hawk-like gaze lock dead onto the exact same direction, Zane's heart started pounding. His instincts were right. In the middle of this dead sea of sand, the presence of moisture meant only one thing. An impossibly rare geographical anomaly was just ahead. It had to be a legendary oasis. Moving quickly, the two of them scaled a towering, massive sand dune. When Zane clawed his way to the crest of the dune and looked down, he started trembling with pure ecstasy. An oasis, the mythical desert oasis that was supposed to bring the dead back to life, was actually sitting right in front of them. Nestled in the center of a wind-eroded canyon lay a crystal-clear, shimmering blue lake. Looking at the rippling water, Zane knew his burning throat was finally saved. Stripped of all logic and caution, Zane sprinted down the slope toward the lake, like a starving, rabid dog. Standing at the top of the dune, Dylan didn't move an inch. He simply watched Zane's back with the icy, detached stare of someone looking at a dead man. But consumed by extreme, maddening thirst, Zane couldn't care less. He hadn't swallowed a single drop of clean water in days. His brain was completely hijacked by one primal urge. Drink. He threw himself onto the edge of the pool, burying his face in the water and gulping down the life-saving liquid like a madman, completely ignoring whether it was safe. The sensation was violently euphoric. The icy, refreshing water greedily seeped into his cracked, bleeding skin. Under the oppressive 50-degree hellfire of the desert sun, this was the absolute first time in days Zane had felt the salvation of cooling water. But just as he was practically drowning in that sweet, desperate joy, a massive, twisted shadow silently glided into his vision from the depths of the lake. Within that pitch-black, abyssal shadow, a single point of eerie blue light suddenly flickered to life. The light wasn't blinding. Instead, it radiated an incredibly bizarre, hypnotic warmth. Instantly, an overwhelming, tsunami-like wave of pure exhaustion crashed into Zane's brain. His eyelids became as heavy as lead, and his consciousness began to violently plummet into darkness. From high above, Dylan's furious, booming curse shattered the silence. "You brainless piece of trash, do you want to be fish food?" Accompanied by the shrieking sound of tearing wind, Dylan plummeted from the top of the dune like a falling meteor. Seeing that unsheathed crimson greatsword hurtling down, Zane finally felt the suffocating, ruthless killing intent just 1 second before he completely blacked out. Who could have imagined that beneath the seemingly tranquil surface of this tiny oasis lay an abyssal deep-water zone? And worse, a lurking monster had already unhinged its massive jaws, just waiting for Zane to deliver himself as a free meal. In that hair's breadth of a second, Dylan clamped his iron grip onto the back of Zane's collar. Just as the bizarre fish violently breached the surface, attempting to swallow its prey whole, Dylan ruthlessly yanked Zane out of the danger zone, like pulling a weed. Then, without missing a beat, Dylan stepped forward, planting himself right at the water's edge. Glaring down at the rippling surface, he sneered coldly, "I finally found a new toy to play with. Did you really think a beast like you was worthy of eating him?" The next second, the muscles in Dylan's arms slightly contracted. He unleashed a devastating backhand slash with his greatsword, crashing into the monster and sending a massive crimson-tainted tidal wave surging across the oasis. Collapsed on the sand a few yards away, Zane was paralyzed with shock, cold sweat completely soaking his back. Just half a second ago, he was a millimeter away from becoming digested mush inside that fish's stomach. High above the splashed water, Zane stared blankly at a brilliant rainbow refracting in the air. So the wasteland legends were actually true. Light radiating in 7 distinct colors really did exist in this dead world. Dylan coldly glanced at the floating corpse and explained that this monstrosity was a sand anglerfish. It survived by using that faintly glowing lure on its forehead to mesmerize dehydrated prey, swallowing them whole before they even realized they were dead. As he turned back, Dylan's expression visibly darkened. It was obvious that the old lunatic was genuinely infuriated. Bam! He ruthlessly slammed his fist straight into Zane's forehead, roaring, "Do you have any idea that you almost became a pile of monster shit just now? If that bastard dragged you into the deep zone, even I wouldn't have been able to drag your pathetic corpse out." Dylan pointed a finger at Zane's nose, raining curses down on him. "Did you swallow everything I taught you along with the sand? The second you find a puddle of water, you throw all caution out the window. Do you think you're invincible? In this cannibalistic desert, brain-dead idiots like you who lack the most basic survival instincts are always the first to die." Clutching his throbbing forehead, Zane didn't dare breathe loudly, nodding frantically. He knew damn well that if the old man hadn't reacted at the speed of light, he'd be meeting his maker right now. After venting his anger, Dylan kicked the monsterfish's corpse onto the shore and ordered Zane to get to work skinning its hide. Although this C-rank sand anglerfish looked grotesque, its pale outer skin boasted incredible flexibility and thermal insulation. If handled properly, it was top-tier material for crafting a desert survival robe. Massaging his numb wrist, Zane asked stupidly, "What, do you need a new coat or something?" That single sentence instantly poured gasoline on Dylan's rage. Dylan roared so loudly he practically spat in Zane's face. "Could you possibly get any dumber? The clothes are for you. I really want to crack open your skull and see if someone cast a petrification spell on your brain last year." Dylan's booming voice made Zane's ears ring violently. Completely cowed, Zane shrank his neck and repeatedly muttered frantic apologies. Calming down slightly, Dylan used the tip of his sword to prod the fish's scales. He noted that the beast's mutation was bizarre. While it was as massive as a mountain of meat, it somehow retained the primitive anatomical traits of ancient earth fish. Knowing that a wasteland rat like Zane had never seen a real fish in his life, Dylan grabbed him by the collar and hauled him over to take a closer look. Peering closely, Zane was genuinely disturbed by the grotesque anatomy. A monster that could breathe in subterranean desert rivers completely defied biological logic, and its rows of jagged fangs were enough to make anyone's skin crawl. Despite his shock, Zane obediently pulled out his dagger and began the grueling process of skinning the carcass. Barely 2 scrapes in, Dylan's mockery arrived right on cue. "Are you giving it a fucking back massage? The pressure you're putting on that blade is so gentle you could revive a dead fish with comfort." Zane sawed away, dripping with sweat, but the hide didn't even budge. The blade scraped against the skin like dull metal on a steel plate. The beast's natural defense was way tougher than he anticipated. Since raw physical force was useless, Zane decided to try channeling mana, hoping high-frequency energy could slice through the tough exterior. Taking a deep breath, he hyper-compressed his mana, funneling it continuously into the tip of the dagger. As the blade let out a faint hum, he slashed again, and this time, the dagger sliced through the incredibly tough skin like a hot knife through butter. After painstakingly peeling off the hide, Zane chipped off the monster's razor-sharp dorsal fin and ground it down into a crude bone needle. He then yanked out the steel wire-like tendons from the beast's back to use as thread, clumsily attempting to stitch a robe together. However, reality quickly slapped him in the face. Looking at the foul, fishy-smelling, horrific patchwork nightmare in his hands, which looked like it had been sewn together by drunken centipedes, Zane realized even a starving beggar in the slums would refuse to wear it. Watching Zane's defeated expression, Dylan surprisingly didn't curse him out. He just smirked coldly and told him to take his time. The fish was massive. They had plenty of spare material, ripping seams and starting over repeatedly. The hours slipped away until the dead of night arrived. After a torturous amount of effort, Zane finally managed to stitch together a hooded robe that could actually serve its purpose. After surviving 8 humiliating, disastrous failures, a crude but functional thermal desert robe was finally born. Just as Zane let out a heavy sigh of relief, Dylan suddenly barked his name from behind. Startled like a frightened bird, Zane desperately clutched the robe to his chest and yelled defensively, "This one is mine. Don't even think about throwing it in the fire again." Dylan rolled his eyes, showing absolutely zero interest in the fishy-smelling rags Zane had cobbled together. He carelessly tossed over a slimy, dark organ and ordered Zane to eat it immediately. It was a sand anglerfish's gallbladder, an incredibly rare, highly prized detoxifying ingredient on the black market. With a deadpan expression, Dylan demanded that Zane swallow the foul thing raw, without leaving a single drop behind. Resting his hand on the hilt of his greatsword, Dylan issued a chilling final threat: "Eat it, or drop dead." But Dylan didn't even give Zane a millisecond to mentally prepare. He shoved the slimy, blood-red gallbladder directly into Zane's face. Staring at the foul, pungent lump of flesh, Zane's throat tightened, his stomach churning violently at the mere thought of biting into it. But under Dylan's freezing, dead-eyed glare, Zane had no choice. He gritted his teeth, squeezed his eyes shut, and practically shoved the repulsive thing into his mouth with reckless abandon. No matter how utterly disgusting it was still better than being chopped in half by this crazy old bastard. But after 2 bites, Zane's eyes snapped wide open in surprise. The organ didn't have the horrific, fishy stench he expected. Instead, it went down incredibly smooth. It felt like swallowing a mouthful of melting snow. It provided zero feeling of fullness, instantly dissolving and sliding down his throat, straight into the pit of his stomach. Watching Zane inhale it so quickly, Dylan crossed his arms, a sadistic smirk curling on his lips. Eating it that fast is a great way to get yourself killed. The mockery in Dylan's eyes grew sharper. The timing should be just about right. Do you feel a little fire burning in your belly yet? Before the words even settled, an absolutely terrifying volcanic heat violently detonated inside Zane's abdomen. His internal organs felt like they had just been tossed into a blast furnace. His legs instantly gave out, and he crashed to his knees in agony, immediately realizing this was not the normal reaction to any medicinal supplement. What the hell was happening? The pain of his blood literally feeling like it was boiling over had completely shattered his physical limits. His body temperature was spiking at a logic-defying, lethal rate. The berserk medicinal energy tore through him like a rampaging beast, not only searing his organs, but violently ripping apart his mana circuits, sending his power into absolute overdrive. Zane felt like a pressure cooker, seconds away from violently exploding into pieces. Standing beside him, Dylan was as cold as a spectator. He kept his arms crossed and simply ordered Zane to shut his mouth and endure it. Dylan spoke with the detached, chilling tone of a prophet. Every living thing in this world is just an illusion, drifting in the endless sands. Sooner or later, they will all be ruthlessly broken down and melted away, leaving no trace behind, just like the organ you swallowed. Everything is born from the desert, and everything returns to the desert. Death is merely fuel for the next cycle of the wasteland. Writhe in absolute agony, Zane had zero mental capacity to listen to the old lunatic's philosophical bullshit. He felt like the marrow in his bones was literally melting. Thrashing violently on the ground, Zane screamed, "Help me! You psycho old bastard, stop giving me a damn lecture. My intestines are burning a hole through my stomach." Looking down from above, Dylan merely shot him an icy, indifferent glance without lifting a finger. The absorption of this kind of raw energy could only be endured physically. Even a god couldn't interfere. It was entirely the kid's own fault for devouring it like a starving dog, causing the medicinal power to trigger an instant, catastrophic avalanche inside his body. As Zane's blood-curdling screams echoed through the night, the sociopathic old man literally turned his back, pulled his cloak over himself, and actually went straight to sleep. When Zane finally cracked his eyes open to an unbelievable euphoric sense of relief, the blinding morning sun was already baking the dunes. Sitting nearby, Dylan casually polished his crimson greatsword, throwing Zane a half-smile. Finally decided to wake up, you piece of trash? Zane shot up from the sand in a panic, gasping heavily for air, and frantically patted his perfectly intact stomach with lingering terror. He glared venomously at Dylan, gritting his teeth. "I didn't wake up. I was in a damn coma. You old bastard actually left me to die last night." But mid-rant, Zane suddenly froze. He stared down in shock, realizing the incinerating fire inside his body had completely vanished. In its place was an unprecedented, terrifyingly dense surge of explosive power. He clenched his fists, finding his muscles as tightly packed and unbreakable as tempered steel. The mana inside him roared freely through his veins like an unleashed hurricane. That disgusting organ really was a legendary body-reforging miracle drug. Stunned by the sheer density of his own power, Zane gasped, "Holy shit, what just happened? I feel like my power level just multiplied a few times over." Dylan scoffed coldly, stating that it was entirely thanks to the premium gallbladder of the sand anglerfish. To hunters who spilled blood traversing the death deserts year-round, that organ was an invaluable second life. It permanently rewrote the human body's heat tolerance, granting immunity to most natural toxins and the abrasive erosion of sandstorms. Sold to a major trading caravan, it could fetch enough magic crystals to buy a small fortress. A shockwave rippled through Zane's heart. He never in a million years expected Dylan, a cheapskate who wouldn't even share a drop of dew, to casually hand him an unimaginably priceless treasure. Noticing the shift in Zane's eyes, Dylan immediately cut him off with extreme disgust. "Don't give me that nauseating grateful look. I only gave it to you because you're a pathetic burden. If I'm going to drag you around, I need you to be a slightly more durable meat shield." Zane rolled his eyes, but internally, he completely wiped the slate clean, on Dylan leaving him to die last night. The old man's mouth was venomous, but he had genuinely just handed Zane a life-changing miracle. As the sun hit its peak, Dylan patted the massive, completely picked clean skeleton of the monster fish, looking unusually satisfied. The C-rank beast had been undeniably meaty, giving him his first full meal in a long time. Dylan then ticked Zane, who was still sitting in the sand, ordering him to put on his ragged robe and get moving immediately. Feeling the raw power surging through his veins, a confident, arrogant smirk naturally curled on Zane's lips. Throwing on the crude robe, he fired back with a sarcastic, roguelike salute. "Yes, sir, you old fossil. Which way are we slaughtering our way through today?" Zane sadly realized he was getting way too used to taking orders from this psycho. After half a month of non-stop hellish forced marches, a terrifying, sky-blotting sandstorm suddenly loomed before them at noon, blocking their path like a massive black wall. Half a month ago, a sight like that would have made Zane's legs give out in terror, but today, armed with his sand manipulation and the anglerfish's gallbladder, this apocalypse-level storm that could rip a normal man to shreds felt like nothing more than a refreshing summer breeze. Yet Dylan, who possessed absolutely no sand manipulation abilities, casually strolled through the heart of the raging sandstorm as if walking on flat ground, without even a corner of his cloak disturbed by the wind. Furthermore, the old maniac hadn't spoken a single word to Zane in days. Zane seriously suspected his brain had finally fossilized into senile dementia, or some intermittent manic phase. Zane had been following him like a stray dog for 2 solid weeks, but did this guy even know where the hell he was going? Dylan didn't seem to have any clear direction. Zane was starting to think the blind old bastard was completely lost. Just as Zane was violently cursing him in his head for being an idiot with zero sense of direction, a massive mutated ant silently appeared right behind him. But today, Zane didn't even blink. He simply pointed backward without looking, and a violent stream of sand instantly shredded the creature to pieces. Quiet down, trash. Slowly but surely, surviving next to a psycho who treated human life like cheap dirt, had rubbed off on Zane, infusing him with the cold, decisive aura of a ruthless killer. Just then, Zane sharply detected more unnatural movement shifting beneath the sand behind him. That previous strike actually hadn't pierced completely through. It seemed the monster's chitin armor was significantly tougher than he had anticipated. Zane had honestly hoped these brainless bugs would have the sense to detour around him, but clearly, that was wishful thinking. Through his sand perception, he clearly saw several giant ants burrowing frantically toward his position from below. Zane's eyes turned completely icy, his tone devoid of any mercy. "If you're lining up to die, I'll be happy to oblige." Bang! He slammed his palm heavily against the ground, causing a violent column of sand to erupt. The churning yellow sand was violently blasted apart, forcing the buried ant swarm out into the scorching sun. Now, the roles were reversed. It was time for him to lead the hunt. He couldn't hide behind Dylan like a useless coward forever. Facing the swarming giant ants, Zane outright detonated a localized death sandstorm, instantly swallowing and shredding them to pieces. To his ears, the sickening crunch of the prey's armor shattering actually sounded indescribably pleasant and satisfying. Honestly, Zane was starting to enjoy days with sandstorms, because as far as the eye could see, in this domain of endless yellow sand, he was the absolute master. But the moment he turned his head, Zane froze. That cursed old bastard hadn't even looked back, and was already dozens of meters away. If he didn't catch up immediately, he would absolutely be left behind without a second thought. Zane rolled his eyes aggressively in his mind. Did this old freak have zero concept of teamwork? With his withered bones, he was still playing the edgy, lone wolf wanderer. Gritting his teeth, he immediately broke into a sprint, chasing after Dylan's fading silhouette. But the exact moment he took a few steps, Zane's heart spasmed violently. Ever since witnessing Dylan's terrifying power, Zane's nerves had been stretched to their absolute limit. Relying on his sand manipulation, he could instantly detect any living creature encroaching on the desert floor. But the sensation that just swept beneath the soles of his boots was entirely different from those low-tier beasts. This time, what Zane felt wasn't a simple biological vibration, but a pure, unadulterated terror striking the depths of his soul. There was absolutely no doubt. A massive, unimaginable behemoth was hibernating deep beneath the dune he stood on. Boom! The next second, the surface of the sand violently exploded, and countless giant ants were forcefully blasted into the air, like a geyser by the monster below. The deafening eruption completely verified Zane's lethal intuition. His face draining of color, he cursed viciously. Just how massive was this damn ant colony buried under the sand? Zane's head snapped around, looking toward Dylan in the distance. The sight almost made him cough up blood. The old bastard had somehow already seated himself high atop a sand dune, leisurely watching the show unfold. Zane bit his lip hard, forcefully swallowing the cry for help stuck in his throat. He absolutely refused to act like an unweaned infant, crying and begging this old monster to save his life the second danger hit. The next moment, Zane let out a furious roar, fully detonating his sand manipulation ability, and charged head-on into the frenzied swarm of giant ants. It finally clicked in Zane's head. With Dylan's psychotic level of perception, how could he possibly miss the swarm beneath their feet? He didn't draw his sword or get a single warning, making it glaringly obvious that he intentionally tossed Zane into the bug pit as a brutal live combat test. Sweeping his hand forward, Zane launched countless razor-sharp sand spears that tore through the air, whistling violently as they impaled the swarm. Just then, a soldier ant at the very front actually tanked the barrage of sand spears, fearlessly breaking through the line of fire. Its razor-sharp mandibles snapped directly at Zane's face. Zane executed a desperate lateral roll, barely dodging the lethal bite. A chill ran down his spine. These suicidal bugs actually knew how to coordinate a siege. God only knew how many more soldier ants were ambushing from below. If this were a simple one-on-one, Zane was absolutely confident he could grind them down into bone dust, inch by inch. But unfortunately, this swarm of honorless insects had no intention of playing fair. They were relying entirely on suicidal, overwhelming numbers to crush him. Trapped in a desperate corner, as the insect tide swarmed him like a crushing black storm, a flash of pure tactical instinct struck Zane's mind. Without hesitation, he commanded the sand beneath his boots to hypercompress, condensing suspended staircases of sand mid-air. Stepping on them, he frantically propelled himself upward into the sky. Looking down, Zane felt like he had accidentally fallen straight into the funnel of an ant hill. Beneath him, a densely packed, endless tide of giant ants continued to surge out like a black tsunami. It was an absolutely endless slaughter. The absolute priority right now was to gain altitude and control the battlefield from above. Thankfully, these dirt-digging bugs didn't have air superiority. However, Just as Zane thought he had bought a moment of safety, a brutally violent force suddenly yanked his ankle. Zane looked down in sheer panic, his scalp going numb at the sight. The psychotic swarm had actually latched onto him from below. Biting onto each other's abdomens, they had forcibly linked their bodies together to form a horrifying, pitch-black biological chain. This completely unnatural swarm intelligence made a wave of despair wash over Zane. They couldn't fly, but by blindly sacrificing themselves to stack their bodies, they had effectively built a meat grinder stairway straight into the sky. The next second, the horde at the base of the chain yanked downward with all their collective might. The terrifying brute force instantly shattered Zane's suspended sand stairs. Like a meteor shot out of the sky, he was violently dragged down and slammed brutally into the hard dunes. The devastating impact made Zane see stars. His organs felt like they had been violently displaced, and a mouthful of blood rushed up his throat. Those damn beasts. That slam had nearly snapped his spine in half. Blinded by the excruciating pain, Zane's eyes instinctively shot toward Dylan in the distance, involuntarily flashing a desperate, dying plea for rescue. He knew damn well that if that crazy old bastard drew his sword, Zane could walk out of this insect sea without another scratch. But, the split second his sanity was almost completely hijacked by his survival instinct, Zane viciously bit down on his tongue. Blood seeping from his lips, he twisted his mouth into a terrifyingly deranged, savage smirk. He glared dead at Dylan, all traces of begging completely erased from his eyes, replaced by pure, psychotic defiance. He didn't need this old monster to save him. He wanted the old blind bastard to watch closely exactly how he was going to claw his way back out of hell. Sitting casually on the dune, Dylan watched the lone wolf glare in Zane's eyes and smirked coldly. Now that is the look of a lunatic meant to survive the wasteland. Idiot. In a world completely swallowed by endless yellow sand, Zane's sand manipulation ability was undeniably the creator's most generous blessing. With that power, he could easily commandeer a fortress and live like a tyrannical warlord. But if he settled for that kind of comfortable, domesticated life, he would hit his ceiling forever, remaining nothing more than a slightly overpowered piece of trash. The brain-dead idiots, sheltered behind high walls, didn't even know why the world had turned into this hellscape, content to hide away and dream their empty fantasies. A true awakened was supposed to act like a cornered beast, constantly pushing, tearing, and reforging their limits, on the absolute edge of life and death, rather than conforming to the Hunter Association's rigid, mechanical rank systems. Watching Zane fighting covered in blood amidst the swarm, the cloudy depths of Dylan's eyes unknowingly stirred with violent memories from over a century ago. This withered old man had truly dragged his broken body through more than 100 years of history. He had personally witnessed the blue planet reduced to a sea of dead ash and fire overnight. The Dylan of that era was weak, desperate, and utterly powerless. His brothers in arms, his true love, all of them were reduced to dust in that apocalyptic explosion. Even his little girl who hadn't even grown up yet. In a collapsing world, he had failed to hold on to a single thing. But Zane was different. This kid's fate held the infinite potential to shatter every death curse thrown at him. Dylan's entire goal was to personally kick Zane straight into the meat grinder of life and death, forcing him to experience the most absolute despair. Only under the crushing pressure of imminent death would this kid act like a piece of iron being violently reforged, evolving at an impossibly frantic speed, just as he was doing now. Pushed into this suffocating corner, Zane finally squeezed out the absolute last drop of his potential, grasping a completely new, lethal application of his sand ability. With bloodshot eyes, he let out a hysterical roar. "Line up and go to hell, you dirty trash." A violent sandstorm erupted instantly, tightly locking the entire swarm down. This was the ultimate killing move Zane had just realized on the razor's edge of death. Ultra-heavy compressed sand detonation. If he couldn't cause wide-range armor penetration, he would compress the attack to the absolute extreme. The core concept of the move was brutally simple, requiring almost zero technical finesse, but by channeling every ounce of his mana, hyper-condensing the mass of the sand, and throwing all his gravitational momentum into a single point, the resulting detonation generated a terrifying kinetic force capable of punching through any armor. Boom! A deafening concussive blast echoed. The sound of flesh tearing and air violently rupturing under pressure fell on Zane's ears like the most beautiful symphony. With this move perfected, these buds that only belonged in the dirt would absolutely be blown to pieces. Before he truly climbed to the absolute peak of power and stepped on Dylan's neck, there was no way in hell he was going to die pathetically in the jaws of some ants. Watching Zane unleash a barrage of explosions in the distance, Dylan scoffed. The idiot is letting it go to his head again. High on the success of his new power, Zane gave up on aiming altogether. He frantically vented his mana, indiscriminately raining ultra-compressed sand bombs into the sea of bugs. In less than 20 seconds, the dune before him was violently cratered with scorched blast zones, the severed limbs of giant ants littering the ground. Staring at the absolute carnage, Zane drowned in a sickly, bloodthirsty euphoria. The sheer dominant thrill of unleashing overwhelming destruction was practically intoxicating. But the exact split second he turned to arrogantly flaunt his apocalyptic handiwork to Dylan, a massive black shadow silently attached itself to his blind spot. The hairs on the back of Zane's neck stood straight up, his heart violently constricting. Damn it, he had let the slaughter go to his head. A fatal mistake like this could absolutely not happen twice. Catching a glimpse in his peripheral vision, he realized this ambushing ant was entirely different from the cannon fodder. Its size was monstrous, its carapace gleaming with a cold metallic sheen. The deadliest part was that, prior to its attack, Zane's sand perception hadn't picked up a single trace of its existence. How the hell could a low-intelligence trash mob know how to conceal its aura, let alone master a high-tier assassination skill like stealth? Worse yet, a sudden numbness spread from his wound. The giant ant was venomous. No wonder his mana output had been stalling earlier. This toxic sludge was clogging up his mana circuits like rusted iron. The violent numbness tore at his nerves, but Zane viciously bit down on his bloody lip, letting out a ruthless sneer. They really thought a cheap, dirty toxin like this could stop him from walking out of here alive? Dream on. But before Zane could counterattack, the shifting sand beneath his boots caved in, and he was violently dragged straight down into the abyssal depths. Amidst the violent sensation of falling, Zane dizzyingly forced his eyes open. By the faint, eerie light, he was horrified to realize he had been dragged directly into the heart of a massive, labyrinthine ant nest. A lethal wave of crisis instantly suffocated him. Up on the surface, he at least had the space to use his sand to escape. But trapped in this claustrophobic subterranean hellhole, he was completely cornered. Even more chilling, the subtle, sickening sound of countless legs scuttling was closing in on him from the dark. Zane painfully turned his head, his pupils shrinking to pinpricks. Swarming over the sand were densely packed, squirming giant ant larvae that looked like bloated maggots. Emitting nauseating hisses, the starving larvae blindly crawled directly onto Zane's arm. Squelch! Their razor-sharp, barbed fangs mercilessly sank straight into his flesh. The paralyzing toxin locked Zane's muscles completely. If this stalemate continued, he would absolutely be eaten alive down to the bone by these disgusting grubs. The suffocating grip of imminent death threatened to crush his sanity. Was his miserable, hard-fought life on the wasteland truly going to end pathetically in the jaws of some underground bugs? Just then, a slightly larger larva lunged forward greedily, terrified of missing out on the fresh blood. Smash! The very next second, Zane erupted. His fist slammed down, violently crushing the larva's head like a ripe watermelon, sending thick, viscous fluids splattering across the cavern floor. This sudden, explosive counter-kill sent uneasy, clicking tremors through the massive black ants lurking above, ready to feast. Spitting out a mouthful of bloody saliva, Zane shakily climbed to his feet, a terrifying, savage sneer stretched across his face. Did you really think I came down here to be your damn appetizer? Even if I die, there's no way in hell I'm dying in a filthy sewer like this. Line up. I'm sending your whole colony straight to hell. Accompanied by extreme killing intent and surging mana, the awakened mark on Zane's arm erupted with blinding light. Right beside the previously dim mark, a solid, golden rank bar violently forged itself into existence. The instant he broke through, the bedrock beneath him groaned under the immense pressure. A catastrophic tidal wave of hyper-compressed sand exploded from the ground like a high-pressure geyser. It wasn't just a localized sandstorm anymore. Every single wall, floor, and ceiling in the cavern simultaneously ruptured, unleashing a lethal torrent of sand. Since these brainless beasts dared to drag him into their home, he was going to completely bury their nest. In a matter of seconds, the majority of the subterranean hive was reduced to rubble under Zane's terrifying, ultra-compressed sand bombardment. Countless larvae and worker ants were instantly pulverized into a bloody paste. Zane could clearly feel that his rank had ascended. His previously exhausted mana and physical stamina were violently overflowing at an unprecedented rate. The euphoric sensation of being completely reborn confirmed without a doubt that he had finally shattered the chains of a bottom-tier awakened. His current physical strength and mana reserves had absolutely crossed the F-rank threshold, brushing against the edge of a much higher tier. But even after his apocalyptic clearing of the room, the ultimate alpha boss lurking in the deepest shadows remained standing in the ruins, completely unscathed. With a heavy, thunderous rumble, A black queen ant the size of an armored tank, fueled by berserk vengeance, charged him like a massive artillery shell. Zane scoffed coldly. Raising both hands, he instantly materialized over a dozen ultra-compressed sand bullets and mercilessly unloaded them directly at its face. He wanted to see exactly what this bastard's skull was made of. Boom, boom, boom. A chain of deafening explosions echoed through the cave. As the dust cleared, Zane's pupils instantly shrank. The armored giant ant didn't have a single scratch on it. Zane ground his teeth together. This monstrosity's defense completely defied biological laws. Conventional explosive kinetic attacks were completely useless against it. No matter how much he compressed the kinetic energy of his sand bullets, hitting that cold metallic black carapace was like tossing pebbles at a tank. Forcing himself to take a deep breath, Zane's brain raced into overdrive. His eyes locked dead onto the microscopic joints between the giant ant's armor plating. Suddenly, a ruthless gleam flashed in his eyes. If he couldn't blow it up from the outside, he would forcefully pry it apart from the seams. No penetration, no explosion, just violently dismembering it like peeling a shrimp. Boom! A violent sand tornado erupted from the cavern floor, perfectly locking the massive armored ant dead in the absolute center of the storm. The veins on Zane's arms bulged as he made a vicious twisting motion with both hands. Countless streams of sand, sharp as steel blades, frantically burrowed into the beast's joints. Forming a colossal meat grinder, the sand violently twisted in the opposite direction, forcefully tearing the carapace outward. Accompanied by the ear-piercing screech of buckling armor, the indestructible giant ant finally let out a horrifying shriek of agony. But just the second its shell was about to be pried open, the ant's mandibles snapped wide, unleashing an incredibly bizarre, ear-splitting high-frequency shriek. Zane's face drained of color. Damn it. The penetrating power of that sound was terrifying. If he didn't shut it up immediately, his brain would give out before its armor did. This completely defied all logic. How the hell did a dirt-digging bug know how to use sonic attacks? The shriek surpassed the limits of human hearing, manifesting as a high-frequency sonic boom. Zane felt his eardrums instantly bleed. It felt like countless steel needles were being hammered directly into his brain. To make matters worse, the enclosed subterranean cavern acted as a perfect, natural echo chamber, exponentially amplifying the lethal destruction of the sonic wave. Zane never expected that this dying bug, backed into a corner, was hiding a suicidal trump card like this. However, instead of making him back down, the excruciating pain completely ignited the bloodthirsty battle frenzy buried deep in Zane's bones. It wanted to play a deathmatch? Then let's bet our lives. Let's see if the stinking bug liquefies his brain first, or if he grinds every single bone in its body into a bloody paste. With bloodshot eyes, Zane tanked the sonic bombardment head-on, manipulating the meat grinder sandstorm to twist and tear with even more psychotic ferocity. Finally, with a sickening crunch, the unbreakable black carapace began to fracture and splinter like shattered glass. In that final, life-or-death moment, Zane let out a trapped beast's roar, forcing every last remaining drop of his mana into the sand stream. He swore to completely shred this armored giant ant into pieces. But suddenly, it felt as if a critical wire deep inside his brain violently snapped. The world before his eyes instantly spun out of control. Zane's mind went completely blank. His body, drained down to the very marrow of his bones, completely stopped responding to his commands, and he toppled backward, like a felled tree. Was this really his limit? Zane viciously bit his lip in his mind. This broken, battered body was ultimately still too damn weak. But in the exact millisecond before the back of his skull could smash against the hard ground, a calloused, massive hand firmly grabbed him by the back of his collar. Dylan's infuriatingly amused laugh echoed from above. If you dare close your eyes here, I guarantee you'll freeze into a corpse with your eyes wide open. You'll be too ugly for me to even bother burying. Zane weakly coughed up a mouthful of blood. This old psycho's lack of urgency was boundless. Zane was literally taking his last breaths, and he was still making sarcastic remarks. But with his consciousness completely fading, Zane could only leave the mess to him. The rest is on you, you old monster. Dylan let out a low chuckle, a rare glimmer of approval flashing in his eyes. You arrogant little brat. Seems you aren't entirely useless after all, actually managing to hold out this long. That was a C-rank lord, strong enough to crush you 10,000 times over, but at death's door, you were like a wild dog that locked its jaws around its throat and refused to let go. You did well, you've earned the right to keep breathing. But from Zane's perspective, though Dylan's mouth was moving non-stop, absolutely no sound reached his ears. Dylan clearly couldn't care less about the minor detail of Zane's ruptured eardrums. He casually lifted Zane off the ground with one hand, holding him like a bleeding, dead cat. Mustering the very last ounce of his strength, Zane hoarsely forced out, "Where are you taking me?" Dylan didn't answer. He simply carried Zane, moving like a phantom, deeper into the collapsing core of the nest. Not long after, in the deepest sanctum of the hive, Zane's blurry vision locked onto a spherical orb, emitting an eerie, pulsing purple light. He mumbled weakly, "What the hell is that thing? Looks pretty cursed." Dylan didn't even glance at him. It didn't matter if Zane shouted. The half-deaf kid wouldn't hear the answer anyway. To make sure Zane understood, Dylan used the tip of his blood-stained sword to rapidly carve a line into the cavern wall, pointing at it for Zane to read. Etched into the rock were the words, "Queen's Soul. Top-tier panacea." Zane's eyelids twitched, and he swallowed hard through a dry throat. "This thing, eating it isn't gonna burn a hole through my stomach, right?" Turning his head, Dylan made a completely unconcealed, throat-slitting gesture that clearly meant, "It will kill you." But in his deafened, delirious state, Zane didn't catch the warning. He simply figured that since the old monster went to all the trouble of dragging him down here, he wouldn't poison his only durable meat shield at a time like this. One bite shouldn't kill him. So, parting his cracked lips, Zane bit down hard on the purple orb. To his absolute shock, as it burst in his mouth, it actually had a bizarrely sweet, strawberry-like flavor. Zane actually thought it tasted pretty good. He was just about to turn and ask Dylan if there were any more, wanting to scarf down another two. But in that exact split second, Zane's eyes bulged violently out of their sockets. Immediately after, an indescribably horrifying agony detonated inside him. He felt as if hundreds of barbed steel brushes were violently churning his internal organs from the inside out. His brain instantly short-circuited. The mechanism by which the Queen's soul took effect was unimaginably brutal. Intestinal inversion. Literally, it frantically twisted and flipped the consumer's entire digestive tract to forcefully reconstruct their physical body. The eggs of the ant queen were inherently a lethal toxin. Even licking a drop was enough to force a person's organs to violently writhe as if thrown into a meat grinder. In short, the victim's organs would be tightly tangled, wrung out like a wet towel, and inverted until they died in excruciating, inhuman torment. Kneeling on the ground and convulsing violently, Zane's bloodshot eyes bulged as his nails dug deep into the sand. He let out a blood-curdling roar at Dylan. "What the fuck kind of poison is this? What the hell did you feed me?" Dylan watched him roll in the dirt with absolute coldness. "If you want to survive in this insane world, then get used to the pain of having your skin peeled and your tendons ripped out." Bizarrely, Dylan's icy words pierced straight through Zane's shattered eardrums, slamming directly into his mind. But goddammit, who the hell could ever get used to the pain of their guts being pureed? The next second, Zane violently vomited a massive mouthful of black blood, mixed with what looked like tissue fragments. Despair washed over him. He knew he was completely finished. His cockroach-like, miserable life was finally meeting its end in this dark, subterranean hell. He should have known. This old bastard was a complete, remorseless, psychotic murderer. What bullshit panacea, what physical reinforcement. This old monster was purely using him as a guinea pig to test the poison in his cursed dungeon. With a heavy thud, Zane's body violently spasmed one last time, before collapsing lifelessly onto the ground, completely still. Dylan indifferently withdrew his gaze and methodically cracked the joints in his wrist. The next moment, his bare hand formed a blade, and with absolute brutality, he plunged it directly into the swollen abdomen of the massive dead ant queen nearby. His entire forearm sank into the gore, ruthlessly rummaging through the foul-smelling internal organs. A few moments later, accompanied by a sickening tearing sound, Dylan pulled his hand out. Clutched tightly in his palm was a crystallized, mist-like core, radiating an eerie, bone-chilling blue aura. A sharp glint flashed in Dylan's eyes. As expected, as the matriarch that birthed an entire hive, the purity and grade of this magic stone were absolutely flawless. This trip through hell had finally yielded a top-tier, priceless treasure. Looking at the corpses of the high-tier giant ants littering the floor, Dylan stroked his chin. The carapace plating and venom glands were highly sought-after commodities on the black market. He might as well butcher and pack them all up. It would translate into an astronomically massive fortune. Inside the freezing cavern, Dylan quietly stared at the crimson greatsword planted by his feet. The blade was emitting a faint, eerie, low hum, almost as if it were thirsting for blood. Running a calloused finger down the spine of the blade, Dylan's voice was a low murmur. "Old friend, I know the kid is going through hell right now, but this is a trial he has to crawl through on his own. If he's too weak and doesn't make it, then he was destined to be a short-lived piece of trash. That's just his fate." With that, Dylan forcefully yanked the greatsword from the stone and slung it smoothly back across his broad shoulders. He stared into the pitch-black depths of the cavern, a rare, imperceptible urgency flashing in his eyes. "Old friend, you haven't forgotten, have you? The time we have left is running incredibly short." No one knew how long he struggled in the darkness. But with a heavy, ragged gasp, Zane finally forced his bloodshot eyes open. Dylan was sitting cross-legged, not far away, a mocking smirk curling his lips. "Finally decided to breathe again? I was half a second away from digging you a grave." The only response he received was an explosion of absolute berserk-killing intent. The next second, Zane violently erupted without warning, launching a devastating sandstorm straight at Dylan's face. Dylan didn't even bother drawing his sword. With a slight shift of his body, he casually dodged the lethal strike. Brushing the dust off his robes, he scoffed, "Making all this noise? Did you think you could bury me with a handful of dirt?" Then, sensing the drastic spike in mana density in the air, Dylan raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes. "Interesting. Looks like you finally decided to get serious, trash." Hovering in the air before Dylan were over 30 hyper-compressed sand bullets. Zane's eyes were bloodshot, his fingers trembling slightly as the lethal projectiles locked dead onto the old man. It was an undisguised declaration of war. The dense cluster of sand bullets instantly cut off all of Dylan's escape routes, but not a single muscle twitched on the old psycho's face. "Idiot. Did surviving once really make you this arrogant?" Zane didn't waste his breath. With a violent flick of his fingers, the terrifying sand bullets rained down like an apocalyptic storm. Amidst the deafening explosions, he forced a furious, roaring question out from the depths of his throat. "You old bastard, why the hell did you try to poison me?" Surrounded by the explosive bombardment, Dylan couldn't even be bothered to answer. The sheer humiliation of being used as a disposable guinea pig had completely hijacked Zane's sanity. Even if it killed him, he swore to tear a chunk of flesh off this old monster today. Zane violently clenched both hands, directly draining the structural sand supporting the cavern roof above. Accompanied by a deafening rumble, the ceiling began to collapse on a massive scale. Countless razor-sharp stalactites and boulders tore loose. Wrapped in Zane's violent sand streams, they transformed into a devastating meteor shower, crashing down insanely toward Dylan's exact position. After unleashing over a dozen limit-breaking bombardments, Zane's lungs burned as he gasped for air like a broken bellows, his legs trembling violently from total exhaustion. Yet, as the smoke cleared, Dylan stood exactly where he had been, completely unscathed. Not even a corner of his robe was torn. Looking at Zane like he was a brain-dead moron, he scolded, "Is your skull entirely filled with sand? The Queen's soul definitely packs enough raw energy to fry a normal brain, but did you seriously not use a single brain cell at all?" Zane stared at Dylan, his pupils trembling violently. He hadn't even messed up the old man's hair. That was the absolute peak of his power, yet he couldn't even scratch this monster's defense. Dylan looked at the exhausted, panting Zane and let out a heavy sigh. "Use that pig brain of yours for 1 second, you idiot. As I wanted you dead, I could crush you into meat paste with one finger. Why the hell would I go through all the trouble of feeding you poison?" Hearing those words, Zane completely froze. As his overheated brain finally cooled down, reality hit him like a truck. The old bastard was absolutely right. The Ant Queen's egg was undoubtedly a lethal toxin, packing enough violent energy to physically twist a person's organs. But every coin has two sides. If you could somehow survive the hellish pain, that tyrannical poison transformed into the ultimate marrow-cleansing elixir, violently burning away every impurity and hidden injury in the body. That was exactly why Zane hadn't exploded into pieces. Instead, he felt as if every single mana circuit in his body had been brutally scrubbed clean. During his psychotic bombardment just now, he had distinctly felt how effortlessly and smoothly the mana flowed through him. Just as the old man had implied, his mana capacity had definitely multiplied several times over. Realizing he had just made a catastrophically stupid mistake, Zane's expression completely froze. The righteous suicidal fury from a second ago instantly morphed into unbearable awkwardness. Growing up as a street rat in the slums, Zane was an absolute master at flipping his attitude to survive. He instantly reeled in his killing intent and smoothly slapped on a shameless cheeky grin. "Ahem, old monster, those attacks just now? I was just giving you a live demonstration of my breakthrough. How's my mana control looking?" Zane forcefully built the most awkward set of stairs to climb down from. He knew damn well that if he didn't instantly play the coward and admit defeat after launching a full-scale assassination attempt, this old psycho would casually rip his head off and use it as a soccer ball. Dylan scoffed, instantly seeing right through the little punk's shameless survival instincts. "Save your disgusting little axe. If you ever bare your fangs at me again, I'll snap every bone in your body inch by inch. Zane immediately snapped to attention. Understood. Absolutely won't happen again. At that moment, the great sword on Dylan's back let out another faint, resonant hum. Dylan rested his hand on the hilt, his eyes turning profound. Old friend, I understand. Dylan knew full well that the kid only survived that hellish physical reconstruction because of his deeply ingrained, almost psychotic survival instinct. This brat was vastly more ruthless and durable than he looked. But if Zane couldn't convert that raw potential into absolute combat power in the shortest time possible, every chip Dylan had bet on this kid would be lost in a spectacularly failed gamble. Dylan turned around and grabbed Zane by the back of his collar, hoisting him up like a stray kitten. All right, playtime is over. Time to get to work. Dangling mid-air, Zane flailed his limbs in desperate protest. You old fossil, where the hell are you dragging me now? Dylan merely replied with a chilling, blood-curdling smirk. Our time is running out. Before this entire place caves in, I'm taking you to see a real show. A deeply ominous premonition suddenly gripped Zane's heart. Boom! Without warning, the ground beneath them violently detonated, unleashing a ferocious shockwave. Zane and Dylan erupted straight out of the earth. Covered in dirt, Zane cursed aggressively. You violent old bastard. Is brute force demolition your only setting? Can't you just find an exit and walk out like a normal human being? Dylan told him to shut his mouth, saying he should be groveling in gratitude just to be alive to see the sun. He mocked Zane's current strength as being as pathetic as a bug's, adding that at this rate, he'd be dead long before he ever touched a woman. But halfway through his insult, Dylan's gaze locked dead onto a colossal entity straight ahead. Zane followed his line of sight, looking up curiously. The apocalyptic sight before him instantly caused his pupils to shrink to pinpricks. What the absolute fuck is that monster? Dylan casually dragged Zane along like a sack of potatoes, walking at an unhurried pace toward the behemoth. Looming majestically amidst the swirling sandstorm was an unimaginably colossal sand turtle, as massive as a mountain. Zane had never seen a beast of this terrifying scale in his entire life. Just standing in its shadow made his legs go weak from the suffocating atmospheric pressure. Dylan calmly explained that this was the mobile fortress, Archelon. Its base form was an incredibly rare turtle-type B-rank magical beast, but the defense of that heavy armor surpassed even in S ranks. Some ruthless faction had hollowed out its interior shell, fortified it, and now utilized it as a mobile war machine, navigating the Dead Sea. Zane's face was painted with absolute horror. These absolute lunatics, they actually use a natural disaster-level monster as a damn mount. In that moment, the sheer, insane vastness of the wasteland completely shattered Zane's worldview. He finally realized he had been nothing more than a pathetic frog waiting to die at the bottom of a well in the slums. Dylan merely scoffed, calling this a low-tier spectacle not even worth mentioning. He promised Zane would see entities horrifying enough to make him piss himself later on. At that moment, the mountain-like giant turtle seemed to sense something, slightly shifting its massive head. Its gargantuan, cloudy amber eye membrane slowly swept over them, sending a violent chill straight down Zane's spine. Suddenly, a figure plummeted from the fortress atop the turtle's back, like a falling meteor. Boom! Sand exploded outward as another old man landed steadily right in front of them. The sheer suffocating pressure of his entrance was undeniable. Pushing his glasses up, the man spoke slowly. With so much trash around earlier, I wasn't entirely sure at first, but it really is you, you old monster. Zane instinctively moved to summon a sandstorm to engage the enemy, but Dylan slapped his hand down. If you're in a rush to reincarnate, be my guest. But don't expect me to collect the corpse of a blind idiot. The bespectacled old man possessed a gaze as incredibly sharp as a hawk's. He spoke with a profound, battle-hardened tone. It truly has been a long time, Diordan. A cynical, mocking smirk curled on Dylan's lips. Long enough indeed. Looks like you've lost a few more teeth, Paversa. Paversa let out a heavy sigh of resignation. If you ask me, you're the absolute freak of nature here. You're over a century old, yet you still possess the overflowing stamina of a bloodthirsty beast. Listening to these two ancient monsters casually reminisce, without restraint, right in front of him, Zane felt they were both completely irredeemably insane. They were clearly shriveled old men with one foot in the grave. By the normal laws of the wasteland, their physical bodies should have rotted and decayed years ago. So why the hell were these old bastards each more terrifyingly powerful than the last? The next second, Paversa casually blew a sharp whistle. In a chilling display, the mountain-sized B-rank sand turtle behind him obediently lowered its terrifying massive head. The sight made Zane's jaw practically drop into the sand. This walking natural disaster had actually been tamed to obey like a household dog. Zane wisely clamped his mouth shut, suppressing his breathing to the absolute minimum. He knew perfectly well that in a bloodbath zone filled with monsters like these, even a misplaced sneeze could bring instant death. Perversa's sharp gaze suddenly locked onto Zane, standing behind Dylan. "What's with the fresh face? Did you finally start collecting lapdogs, lone wolf?" Dylan arrogantly scoffed. "I recently decided to do my part for wasteland conservation. Just picked up some recyclable trash off the side of the road." Perversa narrowed his eyes. He knew Dylan far too well. For this god of death to actually travel with a living companion, the bloody end of the world must truly be upon them. When Zane followed them and truly stepped inside the fortress within the giant turtle, he was utterly blown away. Beneath this indestructible shell lay a massive, highly ordered, subterranean human community. Dylan lowered his voice, dripping with disdain. "This is the doghouse of the Mott family. They're all direct descendants spawned from that old bastard Perversa. A bunch of parasites hiding in a shell, thinking they're the chosen ones of destiny. To put it bluntly, if Archelon drops dead tomorrow, these useless leeches wouldn't survive a single day in the open." Walking ahead, Perversa coldly glanced back over his shoulder. "Shut your foul mouth, Diordan. How much do you, a wild dog eating dirt in the desert, actually know about our foundation? Stop spouting your arrogant nonsense." Dylan had seen far too many people like them. In his eyes, the Mott family was nothing but a nest of parasites clinging to a turtle shell. "The second you kick the bucket, Archelon will toss them all like dead weight. Tell me I'm wrong." Perversa clearly didn't want to air their dirty laundry in front of the younger generation. He scoffed and dismissed the topic, saying they could discuss it in private later. 10 minutes later, bang. Dylan rudely slammed a sand-covered boot heavily onto Perversa's desk. Tilting his chin up arrogantly, he demanded, "You old mole, you must have hoarded plenty of premium loot from the black market lately. Stop hiding it and lay it all out." Hearing that, Perversa shook his head in resignation. With a casual wave of his hand, he tore open a subspace rift right in midair. In a flash of light, he emptied out an absolute arsenal of top-tier spoils and rare materials he had recently collected. Standing in the back, Zane's jaw practically hit the floor. "Holy shit, you have an entire armory in there?" Having scrapped in the slums his whole life, Zane stared wide-eyed, completely convinced the bespectacled old man had just cast some miraculous space magic to pull objects out of thin air. Dylan scoffed loudly, mercilessly mocking him for not even knowing the absolute basics of subspace storage tech. He muttered that he couldn't believe he was traveling the wasteland with a purebred illiterate. Zane's face flushed with anger. "I grew up starving in the slums. Where the hell would I learn about rich people tech? Would it kill you to just explain it to me?" While the two of them bickered, Perversa sifted through the pile and picked out a massive, frost-radiating fang. Perversa stroked the fang and sighed in admiration. He praised Diordan's eye for quality, noting that it remained as sharp as ever. Everything he brought in was a flawless, top-tier specimen. Dylan told him to cut the cheap flattery and demanded to note exactly how much he was willing to pay for the haul. Perversa smiled warmly and offered to pay in high-purity magic stones. The instant those words left his mouth, a murderous glint flashed in Dylan's eyes, and his hand instantly gripped the hilt of his crimson greatsword. Perversa quickly waved his hands, laughing that he was only trying to lighten the mood. He knew perfectly well that standard magic stones were useless to a monster like Dylan, so he seriously asked what Dylan actually wanted. Slowly releasing his grip on the sword, Dylan stated his price. "I need a premium breastplate, forged from the residual core of the Wolf Shadow Queen. On top of that, throw in a subspace storage tool." Perversa furrowed his brows in deep confusion. "What use do you have for a breastplate? With your ridiculous physical defense, wearing armor is completely redundant. Besides, isn't your own subspace storage already maxed out?" Dylan grabbed Zane by the collar and forcefully yanked him forward. "Don't misunderstand. It's not for me. It's a lifeline for this useless brat." Hearing that, a razor-sharp glint flashed in Perversa's cloudy eyes. This was more absurd than the sun rising in the west. The legendary bloodthirsty Diordan was actually playing babysitter and scrounging for gear for someone else? This unremarkable kid had to be insanely valuable to him. Dropping his dismissive attitude, Perversa turned toward the door and shouted, "Kylie." The moment the order was given, the heavy metal door swung open briskly, accompanied by sharp, confident footsteps. A tall figure strode into the room. Zane instinctively looked up, and after eating sand in the desert for half a month, his rugged face actually flushed with a rare, faint blush. "You called for me, Grandpa?" The girl possessed a sharp, athletic build and short brown hair, radiating an incredibly cool, fierce artisan vibe. Versa pointed at Zane and asked if the subspace bracelet she had crafted recently was still available. Kylie thought for a second and replied, "The bracelet has already been sold, but I still have an Aegis gauntlet in the vault. The enchantment stats on it are so flawless that I couldn't bear to sell it yet." Without batting an eye, Versa waved his hand and ordered her to give that masterwork gauntlet to Zane. Kylie's eyes widened in sheer shock. That enchanted gear was worth a small fortune. But she quickly regained her composure. Turning her gaze to the terrifying aura of the man standing beside Zane, she said, "Greetings, Lord Diordan. You are as intimidating as ever." For once, Dylan didn't respond with an insult. He actually offered a rare compliment, noting that she truly lived up to Paversa's bloodline by mastering such a highly sought-after trade. After all, even in New Soul, enchanters who could breed soul into gear were rarer than dying breeds. Business concluded, Paversa dismissed his granddaughter, telling her to take Zane to the vault to collect the gear. Before she left, he specifically instructed her to notify the master blacksmith Noel to fire up the forge for the requested breastplate immediately. Wearing an incredibly smug, punchable grin, Zane eagerly followed Kylie out the door, leaving the two scheming old monsters alone in the office. Walking down the dim metal corridor, Kylie tried to hold it in, but her intense curiosity finally got the better of her. She glanced sideways at Zane, completely baffled as to what kind of relationship this painfully average-looking guy had with a living nightmare like Diordan. Zane didn't need to guess who the monster she referred to was. He let out a bitter laugh and shrugged helplessly. "Don't even ask. I'm just an unlucky bastard who didn't check his horoscope. Right now, I'm basically a hostage getting dragged around the wasteland by that old psycho as free labor." Kylie almost had a breakdown, practically unable to believe Zane's words. "He's dragging you around as a living hostage?" That emotionless monster actually kept someone alive? Looking at her horrified reaction, Zane immediately understood. It seemed this woman was in the exact same miserable boat as him. She must have witnessed Dylan's bloodthirsty brutality firsthand, leaving her with an incurable, permanent psychological shadow. Kylie lowered her voice and warned Zane to watch his back, because that old bone wasn't human at all. He was a bloodthirsty beast wearing human skin. Before long, the two navigated the corridors and arrived at her exclusive enchanting workshop. Kylie told Zane to take a deep breath and try not to blink, because what he was about to see would absolutely shatter his wasteland hick worldview. As the heavy hermetic doors slowly hissed open, Zane's pupils dilated, his jaw literally dropping lower and lower. The luxurious arsenal displayed inside was something he couldn't have even dreamt of in his entire miserable life. Everywhere he looked, the climate-controlled racks were packed with dazzling premium gear, each piece humming with the intricate enchantment circuits she had personally forged. The item she was most proud of was the Aegis gauntlet resting on the center pedestal. Not only did it feature an incredibly expensive built-in subspace storage array, but it also possessed a god-tier self-repairing function that absorbed ambient mana. It was an absolute masterpiece among masterpieces, the true apex of top-tier gear. Listening to Kylie list off its specs, Zane's eyes practically glowed green with greed, an overwhelming wave of ecstasy surging through his heart. Aside from self-repair, the gauntlet was inscribed with high-tier fire attribute enchantment circuits. Depending on the elemental gear paired with it, the user could unleash unimaginable, monstrous destructive power. Although giving away this peerless, one-of-a-kind artifact to a street rat she just met felt like slicing off a piece of her own flesh, it was a direct order from her grandfather, Paversa, and she didn't dare disobey. Wearing an incredibly punchable, smug grin, Zane thanked her profusely, patting his chest and promising to treat this massive treasure like his own ancestor. But when Zane gleefully reached out to take the gauntlet, things got awkward. Kylie was gripping the other end with an iron fist, and no matter how hard Zane yanked, the woman absolutely refused to let go. Zane instantly saw through her. The woman's heart was bleeding, and she was on the verge of backing out. But there was no way a starving dog like him was going to drop a top-tier god item that had already been delivered to his mouth. Biting her lower lip, Kylie finally threw a pained tantrum. "No, I can't do it. I absolutely refuse to hand over my proudest masterpiece to a nobody who can't even stabilize his own mana." Zane aggressively pulled back, showing zero mercy. "Lady, you already agreed to give it to me a minute ago. Sorry to break it to you, but this treasure is officially registered under the name Zane now." Boom. Just as the two were engaged in a childish tug-of-war, the entire steel fortress was rocked by a violent seismic shock. Zane stumbled, actually thinking he had triggered some self-destruct mechanism by forcefully grabbing the gauntlet, and almost handed it back in a panic. But Kylie, her face pale, shouted that it wasn't a trap. The earth-shattering tremor was clearly the agonizing cry of the mobile fortress Archelon. she asked with a trembling voice. Could it be? Did those lunatics really attack us? Zane caught his balance and demanded sharply. Who attacked us? Explain yourself right now. But as the blaring fortress alarms drowned out the room, the panicked Kylie clearly had no time left to explain anything to him. Cutting back to the high-level office, amidst the earth-shaking tremors, the two old monsters, Paversa and Dylan, remained as steady as mountains. Glaring at the ceiling with murderous intent, Dylan sneered coldly. These persistent bastards are really getting bolder. Just outside the fortress perimeter, a horde of heavily armed berserk thugs was forcefully boarding the giant turtle's carapace like a swarm of locusts. And these bloodthirsty invaders were none other than the most infamous raider faction in the wasteland, the Scavengers. Zane learned that a brutal mob, known as the Scavengers, was forming a lethal encirclement around them. But completely ignorant of the wasteland's power factions, he had absolutely no idea what kind of bloodthirsty background these people had. With a pale face, Kylie explained that the commander of the Scavengers was an absolute lunatic who had reached the Earth rank awakening. They weren't just traditional raiders. They were a pack of inhuman butchers who derived twisted pleasure from slaughter and torture. Before long, hurried, chaotic footsteps echoed just outside the fortress gates. Kylie shouted frantically toward the control room. Grandpa, the Scavengers' vanguard has already arrived. Yet, those two ancient monsters, Paversa and Dylan, remained as steady as mountains, not even batting an eyelid. Sweating profusely, Zane couldn't help urging Paversa to fire up Archelon and retreat from the danger zone immediately. But Paversa waved his hand dismissively with a cold scoff, stating that the massive mobile fortress had absolutely no need to retreat. Since the trash had come knocking, they would simply crush them head-on. Hearing that, Kylie gritted her teeth and immediately turned to rally the armed fighters of the Mott family. The next second, Dylan slammed his boot heavily onto the solid wood desk, coldly cutting her off. Girl, your grandfather doesn't mean you small fry should go out and die. He means we'll clean up the trash. Kylie froze in her tracks, thinking she had misheard him. Dylan turned his head and bellowed, "Where's my personal cannon fodder?" Zane shuddered reflexively and snapped to attention. With a wave of his hand, Dylan immediately dumped the suicidal combat duties squarely onto Zane's head. Zane felt like he had been struck by lightning, standing there completely dumbfounded. But Dylan ruthlessly told him to shut his mouth. You accepted the gear, now pay the price. You got a god-tier gauntlet for free, now get your ass out there and do some dirty work. Zane cursed violently in his head. He was a rookie who had just scraped past the bottom tier. How the hell was he supposed to fight an Earth-rank murderous psychopath head-on? Dylan didn't care at all about how he bridged the massive level gap. He issued a chilling, absolute order. If Zane dared to take even half a step backward, Dylan would personally rip his head off. Seeing the undeniable killing intent in the old lunatic's eyes, Zane swallowed his despair. He figured dealing with the Scavengers was the better deal. After all, a monster like Dylan really could crush him into meat paste with a single finger. Left with no choice, Zane bit the bullet and walked out of Archelon's heavy armor, all by himself. Facing the swirling sandstorm, Zane ground his teeth and swore to himself. Once he maxed out his power, the very first thing he would do was string that old bastard up and beat him half to death. That damn old fossil actually had the nerve to force him into a suicide mission with such psychopathic threats. The wind howled. Zane took a deep breath, forcefully suppressing his overflowing frustration and fear. Now was not the time to complain. The enemy vanguard would be in his face in 5 minutes, max. Before that happened, he had to transform this stretch of desert into his own absolute killing field. The next moment, Zane slammed both palms into the ground. His mana spread frantically underground like a spider's web, setting up every lethal ambush possible. After all, the enemy forces included monsters several major ranks above him. His brain entered a state of hyper-aroused overdrive, desperately calculating a brutal trap to defeat a far superior force. Inside the surveillance room, Paversa frowned at the monitor showing Zane. Are you absolutely sure you want to send your precious meat shield out to die alone? Dylan didn't even glance at the screen. He just told Paversa to shut up and enjoy the show. My judgment is never wrong. The wild dog I picked has incredibly sharp teeth. Paversa shook his head, feeling that Dylan was simply forcing a plant to grow by pulling it up. No matter how much potential the kid had, the current rank gap was an insurmountable chasm. In this cruel wasteland, even a young beast with pureless bloodlines could easily be torn apart by a pack of hyenas before it grew its fangs. However, right before Zane stepped outside, Paversa had reminded him over the intercom, "Kid, you only need to remember one thing. If you can't hold them off, fall back. The shell of this old turtle isn't something those raiders can crack. It was exactly that safety net from Paversa that acted like a stabilizing pill, causing the crushing pressure on Zane's chest to drop significantly. Meanwhile, on the other side of the sandstorm, the arrogant scavengers had already locked their greedy eyes onto the mountain-like mobile fortress. The desperate outlaws were already calculating how to breach the armor and loot everything inside. In their eyes, as long as they cracked open this lumbering giant turtle, all the women, resources, and premium enchanted gear inside would belong to them. Lust for slaughter and greed instantly hijacked their brains. Cracking their whips, they spurred their mutated sand mounts into a frantic sprint, accelerating faster and faster. As the most infamous scavenger bandit faction in the wasteland, it was time for them to revel in another carnival of blood and screams. But just as they charged recklessly into a seemingly flat stretch of dunes, the iron hooves of the leading dozens of sand mounts instantly plunged into quicksand. Accompanied by agonizing shrieks, the front line violently tumbled and collapsed. One of the leading thugs had lightning-fast reflexes. The second his mount was swallowed, he kicked off hard with both legs, using the momentum to execute a thrilling leap into midair. Suspended in the air, his face was painted with shock. He completely failed to understand what the hell was wrong with this ordinary-looking stretch of sand. Why did the perfectly fine earth suddenly split open into an abyss, without any warning, as if it had grown a mouth? Hearing the screams ahead, the scavengers in the rear broke into a cold sweat. They frantically yanked their reins, desperately scrambling to retreat. As far as the eye could see, the zone of deathly quicksand was writhing frantically, acting like a living creature with its own consciousness, actively swallowing every life form that fell into it. The thug leader in midair twisted his face into a savage snarl, letting out a furious roar. This was undeniably a lethal trap set in advance by a master sand manipulator hiding inside that turtle shell. In that exact moment of their panic, Zane erupted from the quicksand like a ghost ascending from hell, his hand viciously clamping onto the skull of one of the female raiders. The woman didn't even have time to scream. Her eyes dilated in absolute terror. How the hell did this kid slip past her blind spot without making a sound? The bandage leader's eyes nearly split open as he roared, "Get your filthy hands off her right now." Zane didn't even spare him a glance. A violent stream of sand poured relentlessly into the woman's mouth and nose from his fingertips. Before the bandaged man's disbelieving eyes, a horrifying series of bone-crunching cracks echoed through the air. The female raider, who had been breathing and trash-talking just seconds ago, was instantly killed on the spot without so much as a final scream, blood leaking from all her orifices. Like discarding a bag of trash, Zane released his grip, letting the limp corpse collapse heavily into the yellow sand, shaking the blood off his hand. Zane's eyes were as cold as ice. Dead that easily. Could the next one of you try to be at least a little more durable? Before the words finished echoing, a sharp whistling tore through the air directly behind Zane. A raider wielding a katana had closed in like a phantom, ruthlessly executing a lightning-fast Iaido quick-draw slash. A blinding flash of steel ripped the air apart, sending a tyrannical sword aura flying straight towards Zane's back. But the next second, the swordsman's heart dropped in absolute horror. His guaranteed killing strike had only sliced to a fading afterimage made of sand. What kind of freakish movement technique was this kid using? "Don't look up, watch your damn feet," the bandaged man screamed a desperate warning. The swordsman violently snapped his head down, only to see that the sand beneath his boots had already materialized into dozens of thick, jagged spikes. Like a jungle death trap, they had perfectly locked onto his lower body. With lightning reflexes, the swordsman twisted his blade midair, frantically slashing at the ascending sand spikes to chop out a path of survival. At the exact same time, the bandaged man launched his own attack from behind, erupting with a thick, yellow-brown battle aura as he cursed. "You little bastard, you're actually a rare sand manipulator." He threw a devastating punch, blasting a violent gale squarely at Zane's position. But the destructive force sank into the earth like it was hitting a mud pit, whipping up a massive dust storm without harming a single hair on Zane's head. The bandaged man ground his teeth. He never expected that in an endless desert like this, a sand manipulator would possess such a sickeningly overpowered home field advantage. Losing his patience over the absolute rank disparity, he sneered coldly. Channeling the entirety of his Earth rank mana, he planned to use pure, overwhelming brute force to completely shatter that irritating sand defense. Boom! The sand wall was obliterated with one punch. But the split second the bandaged man pushed through, the sight before him made his pupils shrink to pinpricks. His other deputy, who had tried to flank Zane from the side, was currently suspended midair like a dead duck. Several steel-thick sand spears had violently impaled his throat, killing him instantly. The bandaged man's brain buzzed violently. The fight had been going on for less than a minute, and he had already lost 2 of his top lieutenants to this blonde-haired punk. Stepping over the deputy's corpse, Zane turned his head indifferently. The dead, cold stare in his eyes clearly said, "Line up, you're next." Actually, just a few minutes before he stepped out to fight, Pavarsa had grabbed Zane's shoulder and given him a piece of advice. The old man figured that since Zane had lived at the bottom of the food chain, he might have more psychological hang-ups about killing another human than slaughtering monsters. Pavarsa told him grimly, "Remember, the trash waiting outside cannot be called human." At first, Zane didn't quite grasp the meaning, but once he saw the absolute depravity radiating from these raiders, he completely understood why the old man said they were unworthy of being human. These thugs who called themselves scavengers were psychotic sadists who killed purely for entertainment. Over 300 unarmed innocents across the wasteland had been tortured to death in their sick little games. Treating these blood-drinking animals like his own species? That would be an insult to the word human. And that was exactly why, the moment Zane erupted from the quicksand, he didn't hold back a single ounce of mercy, starting the fight with a brutal, horrific execution. Staring at the 2 mangled corpses at his feet, the bandaged man went completely berserk. The terrifying pressure of an earth rank awakened erupted like an active volcano. With bloodshot eyes, he roared, his voice practically tearing the air apart. "You little bastard, I'm going to rip your skin off your bones today." The only response he received was over a dozen hyper-compressed sand bullets instantly exploding in his face. But the bandaged man only let out a vicious sneer. A blinding golden aura instantly burst from his skin, violently shattering the rock-piercing sand bullets to dust. Brushing the dust off his shoulder, a cruel, arrogant smirk returned to the bandaged man's face. "You really think this pathetic little sand trick can break my defense? You bottom-feeding trash really are delusional." He locked his dead, venomous eyes onto Zane. "I guarantee you, there is no way in hell you're dying a quick death today. I'm going to slice the flesh off your bones, piece by piece, and feed it to the sand beasts, right in front of you. I'll crush your limbs into powder, force you to watch your own guts spill out, and make you kneel and beg, like a dying dog, for me to end it." Zane coldly cut off his psychotic, sadistic monologue. "You talk too damn much. Are you really going to waste your miserable life spouting such pathetic last words?" That casual yet incredibly venomous insult instantly pushed the bandaged man's fury past the absolute breaking point. Sitting atop the giant turtle and watching the show, Dylan threw his head back and laughed out loud. "This little shit. His talent for pissing people off is almost as good as mine." Amidst the swirling yellow sand, Zane slowly raised his right arm, the Aegis gauntlet glinting in the sun, and violently clenched his fist. "For garbage like you, I don't need anyone else to step in. Sending you to hell, I'm more than enough."